A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. It was one of those gray mornings when the world felt like a barely awake dream, and I had just settled into my favorite corner of the couch, coffee cradled in hand, when my phone buzzed with a message that shifted my entire day into a realm of unplanned chaos. My sister, Emily, was in a bind again. My heart sank a little because knowing her, this would not be a small request. She had 2 kids under the age of 5, an energetic whirlwind and a determined toddler, and I loved them both fiercely, though I often felt the weight of responsibility to support her. "Hey, can you watch the kids for a few hours? I've got a last-minute appointment," the text read, and in my mind, I could already picture the screen light illuminating her frazzled expression. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and started weighing my options. I wanted to help Emily, I really did. But I had plans, simple ones, just a day to myself to recharge, something I desperately needed after weeks of emotional labor from work. I sat there, contemplating everything, the guilt of saying no, the responsibility that would flicker into my reality should I agree, and the nagging realization that I hadn't met her needs on countless other occasions. Every time she counted on me, it felt a little more like a betrayal of my own needs if I couldn't deliver, just one more notch in the ever-growing tally of my unreliability. With a heavy sigh, I typed back, "I'm so sorry. I really can't today." The regret washed over me almost instantly, as if the warmth of my coffee had become cold. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again, and I braced myself for the emotional cascade that often followed our brief conversations. "You never can you?" Her response was immediate and cut like glass. I could almost hear the hurt in her voice through the screen. A flood of guilt crashed over me. "That's not fair. I'm trying to take care of myself, too," I replied, my fingers hurried but relating each word slowly, as if negotiating my way through a minefield of familial expectation and personal boundaries. We exchanged a few more texts, each tugging at the strings of obligation and disappointment, until the conversation crumbled into silence. I put my phone aside, but it sat there like a weight on my chest, the consequences of my decision ricocheting in my mind. I knew Emily was overwhelmed, that she felt isolated in her parenting journey, but I also felt a flicker of resentment growing. It wasn't just about her, this was about me, reclaiming my space. As the day rolled on, clouds drifted across the sky outside, matching my indecisiveness. I still felt tinged with guilt, yet a little relief flickered with it, and I tried to settle in, allowing myself to embrace the calm, yet I couldn't shake the familiar thought, am I the asshole here? In the days that followed, Emily stopped texting me as much. I caught glimpses of her life through social media, great family outings I was absent from, playground, playdates, motherly milestones. It gnawed at me. Had I really chosen my own comfort over supporting her through her storms? One late afternoon, as autumn leaves began swirling down like soft whispers outside, I decided to confront my feelings. I invited Emily over. When she arrived, I opened the door to a face that mirrored a combination of exhaustion and irritation. The tension hung thick between us like a stubborn spider web. Instead of tiptoeing around our recent distance, I invited her to sit down, poured us some fresh coffee, and admitted how I felt, my fears about not being enough, my struggles with selfishness, and the fatigue that sometimes consumed my every thought. To my surprise, she revealed her own struggles, how isolating parenting could be, how she sometimes felt like she was flailing, and how, in those moments of needing help, she often turned to me simply because I was family. This raw honesty broke the tension in the room, revealing a more profound connection between us than I had first believed. By the end of that conversation, we weren't just siblings discussing obligations, we were 2 people trying to navigate the murky waters of adulthood while balancing the people we loved with the need to care for ourselves. Almost instinctively, we agreed to do better, to lean on each other without judgment, and reshape the lines of expectation into something a bit more fluid. The journey to reforge our relationship wasn't a single moment but rather a series of conversations gently steering us back to empathy and understanding. Weeks passed, and although not every moment was perfect, gradually we learned how to share the load better. Sometimes she would find a babysitter, and I'd take the kids for some weekend fun, and at other times, I took a step back when I needed, trusting that Emily could lean on other friends or resources as well. In reflection, I found that prioritizing my own space did not make me an antagonist in Emily's story, but rather a supportive character learning how to also embrace vulnerability. Recently, she sent me a text that read, "Thanks for being so you," which filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected. Not an update of resentment, but one of acknowledgement and love. There are still days where that same guilt creeps back in, where I wonder if there's a balance I haven't struck, but I've found peace in knowing we're both trying, and perhaps that's enough in our labyrinth of life. As I settled into bed that night, the soft glow of my bedside lamp casting a calming light over the stacks of books lining my shelves, I reflected on the journey I had taken with my sister, Emily. That text she sent a few days ago, "Thanks for being so you," felt like a lifeline thrown to me in the turbulent waters of familial expectations and personal limitations. It was a stark contrast to the earlier exchanges we had, when my attempts to carve out my own space in life often clashed with what she deemed necessary, especially as a single mother juggling the demands of work and parenting. I thought back to the times when my refusal to step in as a backup babysitter left her frustrated, and I could almost feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. But how could I have been her safety net when my own foundation felt shaky, working through my goals while navigating an ever-evolving sense of self? I learned that while my role was to support, it wasn't to stretch myself so thin that it risked fraying everything I had worked so hard to build. As the light of day dimmed, I listened to the soft hum of the world outside my window, a calming backdrop that echoed my thoughts. Each car that passed, each distant bark from a neighbor's dog, reminded me of the life swirling around me, full of responsibilities and the comforting chaos of family ties. Despite my internal struggles, I tried my best to communicate with Emily, to be honest about where I was emotionally. I remembered the awkward but necessary heart-to-heart we had, sitting on her living room couch surrounded by crayon drawings and scattered toys, an oasis of her life's beautiful mess. I could almost laugh at how we both fumbled with our words, wanting to express our love without resentment spilling out, but eventually, the floodgates opened, and we found grounding in mutual support. Our relationship became a tapestry woven with understanding and adjustment. Each thread was a decision not made in haste but rather inspired by the hope that our bond could foster growth in both our lives. I couldn't always be the safety net she hoped for, but I was willing to be her cheering section, the one who brought a batch of homemade cookies when she was drowning in laundry or offered to listen to her rants about an exhausting day, reminding her to breathe through it. That text was more than gratitude. It felt like we were negotiating contracts of care instead of burdens of obligation, which was liberating in its own right. Now that tranquility rested in the acknowledgement of our roles, I felt lighter despite the hints of apprehension that occasionally lingered in my heart. Closing my eyes, I drifted into a dream where we freely shared laughter and affection without the shadows of guilt haunting our corners. It was both nurturing and freeing, a reminder that as we navigate our labyrinth, it could be filled with the joy of discovery rather than the weight of expectations. Whenever I woke to whispers of doubt, I'd pull that text from the recesses of my memory. "Thanks for being so you." It became my mantra, a gentle nudge to remind me that sometimes, just being there authentically is enough to stitch the frayed edges of our connection back together. And perhaps, in the quiet lessons learned through this journey, we both were becoming stronger characters in our intertwined stories, navigating the winding paths and discovering the beauty in our vulnerabilities. As I settled into this newfound understanding of our relationship, I began to embrace the small moments between Emily and me with a deeper appreciation. It was during one of these moments, a lazy Sunday afternoon, that I found myself sprawled out on the couch, a warm mug of chamomile tea cradled in my hands while rain pattered softly against the window. Emily had come over with her daughter, 4-year-old Mia, a lively bundle of energy who could simultaneously brighten the room and leave it in delightful chaos. Mia, with her wild curls bouncing and eyes sparkling with curiosity, flitted around, exploring the various knickknacks that adorned my shelves. I watched her from my cozy spot, a gentle smile on my face, as Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers moving skillfully to thread colorful beads onto string for an arts and crafts project they had spontaneously decided upon. The dull thrum of guilt that had followed me like a shadow began to dissipate as my sister and her daughter filled the living room with laughter. Emily glanced up occasionally, her expression soft with gratitude as if to say, "Thank you for opening your space to us." I could see the way Mia's cheeks glowed with excitement and how careful she was in choosing the next bead, pondering the shades and textures with an artist's precision. In that moment, my heart swelled. I realized that being present didn't always mean sacrificing my own needs. Sometimes, it meant simply allowing space for love to flow, like the colors of beads stringing together into something beautiful. As the afternoon wore on, the rain transitioned from a gentle sprinkle to a full downpour, and with the sound of rain drumming against the roof, we retreated to the kitchen, a familiar laughter mixing with the aroma of cookies baking in the oven. I knew I had nothing planned beyond the two of them being there, and as I gathered the ingredients, flour, sugar, chocolate chips, and an old, well-loved mixing bowl, I felt a surge of happiness. A quiet sense of belonging washed over me, and I couldn't help but think that this was precisely how connections could mend, through shared experiences, laughter, and the simplicity of being together. Later, as we sat around the table, cookies cooling on a rack, I felt a sudden need to express my vulnerability to Emily. I took a breath, my hands enveloping the warm mug once more, and spoke about that lingering guilt, the part of me that worried I'd never be reliable enough. I confessed that while I loved them both dearly, I sometimes felt like I was failing at being a sister and an aunt. Emily listened, her brow furrowing slightly, the afternoon light casting gentle shadows across her face. When I finished, a weight lifted, revealing a tender side of our relationship, the understanding that came from sharing. "Hey," she said softly, "we're both learning as we go. I don't expect you to be my safety net, and I'm sorry if I've ever put that pressure on you." Her words washed over me, a balm to my soul. In the days that followed, our bond deepened. Further. From impromptu movie nights to phone calls that stretched late into the night fueled by wine and laughter, I noticed a shift. The overwhelming fear of inadequacy loosened its grip on me, revealing an openness that allowed us both to express our needs without fear of judgment. It was liberating, a dance under the stars of empathy, where we both hesitated and stumbled yet continued to step in time. When Emily called one day, her voice edged with excitement, I hadn't expected her to ask for my help more intentionally. "I have a conference next week, and I need someone to watch Mia, would you consider it?" I felt a surge of panic at the thought of being responsible for a child, but then I remembered how far we'd come. "I'd love to," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The birth of that new chapter in our sibling relationship transformed the tension into anticipation. The day arrived, and I found myself preparing my modest apartment for Mia with the fervor of a holiday preparation. I can still hear the muffled sound of her laughter echoing down the hallway when she arrived, her tiny shoes squeaking against the floor bringing a warmth to my heart. For the next 2 days, our lives became one joyous whirlwind of crayons, storybooks, and creative messes, reminding me that while I may not have been the most traditional caretaker, I could still be present, still be significant. On the last evening of her stay, Mia and I found ourselves on the floor, surrounded by a halo of half-finished drawings and toys. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes wide with wonder, and asked, "Can we stay like this forever?" Her innocence stung my heart, a reminder of the fleeting nature of childhood innocence. Embracing her just for that moment seemed like a promise to always be a part of her life. Once Emily returned, her face carried both weariness and joy, and when she saw the chaos of toys scattered around, she raised an eyebrow playfully. "Did you survive?" I laughed, realizing that the laughter woven through those brief days had created a tapestry of memories neither of us could have anticipated. That feeling of warmth swelled again as Mia clung to my legs, reluctant to leave, and her pleas were enough to keep my spirits high. As I waved them goodbye, a sense of bittersweet nostalgia settled over me. I thought of that earlier text, a digital reminder of acceptance, and I embraced the space we'd created together. Our labyrinth was no longer just filled with turns and obstacles but rich with color, unspoken love, and the assurance that we were both persistent travelers, constantly rediscovering each other, one cookie and laughter-filled day at a time. And with every twist, every pause we took, I understood that we weren't just making it through, we were crafting the story of us, a story worth telling for years to come. I never thought my child's 3rd birthday party would turn into a battleground for family loyalty, but here we are, and I suppose I should have seen it coming. Ever since I got married to Max, it felt like I stepped into an episode of a reality show, his family always hovering in the background, ready to weigh in on every little thing we did. From the names we picked for our kids to what we served for Thanksgiving dinner, there was always some kind of criticism, but nothing could have prepared me for the bombshell that came the day they called my daughter a mistake. I remember it so clearly. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Max had invited his parents over to discuss our plans for Mara's birthday. They'd been hinting for weeks about a big family celebration, but as we sat around our tiny kitchen table, the conversation took a harsh turn. Someone mentioned how it was so commendable of us to have a child after what they deemed a rushed marriage. The words hung heavy in the air like a thick fog, and then, like some sick twist of fate, his mother chimed in, "Well, at least Mara wasn't an oops. What a lovely mistake she could have been." I could feel my stomach drop, like I'd been punched in the gut. The room went silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Max's eyes widened in surprise, then quickly shifted to mine, searching for my reaction. I could feel my face blazing hot, and all I could think was how could they say that about our daughter? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I hadn't expected this utter disregard for Mara's existence from people who claimed to love her. That was it for me, I decided then and there they wouldn't be invited to the party. And soon, the tension began to simmer beneath the surface at home, even as I came up with a smaller, more intimate celebration, inviting just my parents and a few close friends. Max was torn. He wanted to keep the peace with his family. "It's just one party," he said, his voice low and hesitant. But for me, it was so much more than that. I didn't want to celebrate our child's life in the presence of people who believed she was anything less than a miracle. A week later, as the day approached, I could see the disappointment etched in Max's face, and it hurt me more than I expected. I felt guilty, like I was drawing a line in the sand and forcing him to choose between his family and our daughter. But how could I compromise on our child's self-worth? The day of the party, our apartment was bright and cheerful, adorned with colorful balloons and little decorations that I had put up with care. As I watched Mara laugh and play, completely oblivious to the chaos surrounding her lineage, my heart swelled. I had made the right call, I felt it in my bones. But that night, after Mara was tucked in bed, Max laid beside me in silence, tension building like a tightrope waiting to snap. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're my family, you know. I wish you could just see things from their perspective." I turned to face him, my heart aching. But they are not considering her perspective. She deserves to feel wanted and loved, and they showed me that they're not capable of that. It felt like a rift had opened up between us, one that was born from love but was fueled by pain and misunderstanding. I wanted to scream, to shake him into understanding my point of view, but all I could do was whisper back, "I'm sorry, Max. I can't pretend that their words didn't hurt. And I can't believe they deserve a front row seat to her life." In the weeks that followed, conversations became more strained. I noticed Max's absence during Mara's bedtime stories, his mind clearly elsewhere as he wrestled with unspoken loyalties. Part of me wished I could send a message to his parents, to boldly let them know how their words affected me, how deeply they cut into Mara's innocence. But the other part of me recognized that family dynamics are messy and complicated, often filled with an intricate web of expectancies. I felt lost, uncertain if I did the right thing or truly created an even bigger problem. A few months passed, and I noticed some shifts. Max started standing up for us more. He wouldn't answer every call from his parents, learned to set boundaries that had never been there before. I hoped he was realizing that family is more than blood, it's about respect and love. Some days I still wonder about that invitation I didn't send and how it might have changed the dynamics. We're a family of our own now, and I need to believe we're strong enough to weather any storm, as long as we can shield Mara from any hurtful words. It's an ongoing journey, one filled with bumps and roadblocks, but each day seems to get a bit clearer. Among the chaos, I found something resembling peace, a conviction that my daughter deserves only the most loving, encouraging voices in her life, even if it means disappointing those who can't see her worth. As I lay in bed, I realized that I might not have invited them for this birthday, but I still hope that one day, they may come to understand just how important Mara is, not just to me, but to them too. As I lay in bed, that weighty silence pressing around me, I felt the soft rise and fall of my daughter's breath in the next room. Every small, rhythmic sigh brought me back to the moment we had first brought her home. The world had been so bright and new, I remember cradling her tiny form, whispering promises that I'd always protect her. Yet here I was, days away from her 6th birthday, grappling with the collision of love and hurt. I could still hear the expression on Simon's mother's face when she callously referred to Mara, a slip of the tongue that cut deeper than I think anyone realized. She was a mistake, she had said, her voice dripping with disdain. I sat there, frozen, my heart racing as her words echoed around the table, bouncing between Simon and me, thickening the air until it felt suffocating. We had been discussing the party arrangements, planning a simple backyard gathering with balloons, cake, and giggles. But that day, the festivities turned sour. I had planned on inviting his family, a gesture of goodwill, a way to show Mara that she belongs in this larger family picture. But I couldn't shake that cruel labeling, it festered like an open wound. In Simon's eyes, I saw the confusion morph into fury, his hands clenched into fists on the table, and I felt torn, an invisible tether connecting my love for him and my fierce protection of Mara. Maybe that's when I truly understood, like some slivers of light filtering through clouds, that I had to draw a line. I didn't write the invitations, I couldn't bear the thought of watching his family walk through our front door, smiling, hands outstretched, blissfully unaware of the pain they had hurled at us with such careless ease. I wanted my daughter to feel cherished in all her glorious imperfections, to celebrate the little joys of life without a looming shadow of resentment. Even if it meant disappointing Simon, who believed that family bonds could weather storms, I clung to the notion that Mara's well-being trumped all else. The days ticked down to the party, each passing hour wrought with a heavy uncertainty. Thoughts spiraled like leaves in a whirlwind. What if Simon's family never saw beyond that mistake? What if they became permanent whispers in Mara's ears? I longed to wrap her in a bubble of joy, where only kind words and laughter seeped through. On the eve of her birthday, I set up in the backyard, transforming it into a wonderland. Brightly colored banners waved in the gentle breeze, and the aroma of freshly baked cupcakes lingered in the air. Mara awoke the next morning with a delighted squeal, her eyes sparkling with the promise of adventure. As she bounced through the house, I couldn't help but smile. I had chosen love, had crafted a day where she could simply be a kid, wrapped in the simple joys of friendship, adventures, and her favorite unicorn balloons. When the guests arrived, friends from preschool, neighbors, and my own family, the atmosphere shifted, blooming with laughter and joy. I watched as they tossed confetti and held Mara in their arms, inspecting the cake as if it were the most precious of treasures. Each smile sparked something within me, a flame igniting my heart. Simon arrived late, his expression a mixture of joy and perhaps a shadow of disappointment. After the guests left, he cornered me by the patio, frowning. "You know they're hurt you didn't invite them," he said, a hint of frustration edging his voice. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of that fierce protective instinct I had felt so strongly. I can't have them in our lives if that's how they see our daughter. She needs to know she's not a mistake, not to anyone. The silence expanded between us, a hesitation before release. Finally, after what felt like ages, he nodded quietly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I understand," he said, his voice softer now. I could see he was weighing the strands of love and obligation, questioning the dynamic of family ties. As the dusk settled, I held Mara in my arms again, her laughter echoing in sweet harmonies through the space between us. I had chosen this moment, this sacred time, to nourish what mattered most. Maybe the future would lead to reconciliation with his family, to a day when they'd see what a miracle our Mara truly is, but until then, I could live with the uncertainty. She would thrive in the warmth of acceptance, surrounded by those who valued her light, and that was enough for me. Love isn't always perfect, but it is a journey worth every choice made along the way. As I laid her down for the night, I stroked her hair and whispered into the stillness, "You are so loved, my sweet Mara. No mistakes here, only magic." And as I curled up beside her, I realized that sometimes, choosing peace over family ties can be an act of love too. The soft glow of the nightlight cast gentle shadows across the room, and the rhythmic sound of Mara's breathing was like a soothing lullaby, anchoring me in this moment of deep reflection. I had spent months wrestling with the decision to exclude my husband's family from our lives, especially during milestones that felt etched in stone like a birthday. On the surface, it should have been about balloons, laughter, and cake, but the words they had hurled at my precious daughter still echoed in my mind, sharp and unforgiving. "A mistake," they had said, as if she were a typographical error written in the generation before her, a phrase that had become an unwelcome anchor, dragging down my resolve and filling me with a quiet ache. I remembered the tight smiles plastered on faces that should have radiated joy on my wedding day, the strained conversations at family gatherings, where I felt like a puzzle piece that just wouldn't fit. But it was Mara's laughter, pure and innocent, that sparked a flicker of rebellion within me. I'd refused to let that laughter be tainted by their negativity. I wanted her to grow up enveloped in acceptance and love, not the brand of aloofness their cutting comments seemed to carry like a silent banner. As the nighttime shadows danced along the walls, my thoughts circled back to the upcoming party. I pictured all the faces of friends and loved ones who would uplift Mara, gleaming with encouragement and warmth, and I recognized that the absence of her grandparents and aunts was a sacrifice worth making, not just for her, but for my own spirit too. Yes, sacrificing those familial ties felt heavy, but it also felt like a reclamation of all that was sacred. I wanted to ensure that our space remained a sanctuary, one where no one was allowed to question her value, a fortress built from laughter and joy. As I hugged her to me, I flipped through memories of my own childhood filled with unconditional love. The thought that my daughter might walk a different path because of a cold family history sent a shiver through me. Yet everything in me screamed that she was not, nor would ever be, a mistake, and it was a lesson I wanted to impart in bold letters across her soul. In the days that followed, I worked tirelessly to plan her birthday celebration, the air buzzing with activity as I selected vibrant decorations, hand-picked her favorite treats, and invited the people who genuinely cherished us. Friends from the neighborhood, parents of her schoolmates, all of whom viewed her not as an afterthought but as the miracle she truly was. The day of the party unfolded like a fairy tale, filled with warmth, cheer, and an overwhelming sense of belonging. Mara twirled in her favorite dress, her laughter ringing out like a melody that fulfilled every corner of my heart. I felt pride swelling within me, a protective shield against any whispers of doubt. Yet, in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake off the silence that stemmed from my husband's family. I had chosen to sever ties, and while I stood listening to the jubilant chorus of children and adults celebrating, there lingered a slight shadow of regret. I wondered if one day I would be able to explain my choice to Mara without burdening her with the pain that had colored my decisions. Would her family ever come to understand the joy they had missed out on? I let those thoughts drift as the candles were lit, and I watched her make her wish. And in that moment, as she closed her eyes, I realized that love sometimes meant setting boundaries, even when they extended far beyond the people who raised you. With a soft smile, I tucked that lingering sadness away for another time, deciding that for now, the warmth of friendship would be enough. After all, in this new journey, I could see clearly that mistakes were only what we made them, and my daughter? She was a beautiful unblemished canvas, waiting to be painted with love and acceptance, not the scars of hurtful words. As the day closed, with laughter echoing through our home, it dawned on me that family, in all its forms, could still be a tapestry woven from heartstrings that stretched far and wide, even if some threads were lost along the way. So, look, I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. I'm a single parent to a quirky 7-year-old named Lily, and life is already a bit chaotic as it is, balancing work and school schedules while ensuring my kid has a stable home environment. For the most part, I've tried to keep things light and flowing. But then there's my Aunt Claire, bless her heart, who's always had this knack for pushing my buttons. She's one of those well-meaning relatives who just can't help but give unsolicited advice, and a lot of it revolves around how I'm raising Lily. Everything from what she eats to how I let her express herself creatively, which includes glitter, a lot of glitter. Recently, we had a family gathering for my brother's birthday, and it felt like Aunt Claire was on a mission. I could see her shooting judgmental glances my way whenever she thought Lily was being too loud or too independent, like a hawk stalking its prey. Finally, when she suggested I should take Lily's art supplies away because she thought they were too messy, something inside me just snapped. I remember looking at her, my palms sweaty, and saying something like, "Aunt Claire, if you can't respect my decisions as a parent, then maybe it's best if Lily doesn't come over anymore." The room fell silent, and I instantly regretted saying it, even as the words left my mouth. I could see the shock on her face, and I immediately felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Was I overreacting? Was I really okay with cutting my kid off from one of the few safe spaces she had, just to make a stand? I could almost hear my aunt's heart breaking, but it wasn't just her heartbreak that weighed on me. I felt the burden of being the bad guy in my own family story. I tossed and turned that night, replaying the confrontation in my head, grappling with feelings of anger directed toward Aunt Claire for being so critical, and guilt for possibly taking something away from Lily that she enjoyed. A few days later, she called me, voice trembling, to ask if we could have a chat. When we met, I could tell she was hurt, but she quickly shifted gears to talking about how she feels she's just looking out for Lily. I snapped back like a rubber band. I'm doing the best I can. If you feel that I'm not, then don't come around. After that, I felt awful, but also strangely liberated. My responsibility is to Lily, to protect her joy and creativity. Weeks passed without Aunt Claire, and honestly, Lily asked about her once or twice, but I brushed it off, trying to maintain a brave front. Then the real kicker happened. I overheard Lily talking to her friend about how she didn't want to go to Aunt Claire's house anyway because adults should let kids be kids. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow, and I knew something had shifted. I kept reflecting on whether it was worth it to stand my ground, and while I missed the idea of family dinners and the warmth they brought, I realized my first priority is protecting my daughter from unrealistic expectations. Time marched on, and eventually, Aunt Claire reached out to see if we could start fresh, possibly meet up for donuts at our favorite bakery. I hesitated but texted back, "Let's try." I still don't know if I'm entirely ready to forgive, but as I write this, I feel hopeful. Maybe we could learn to communicate better, create a new understanding. Who knows? Maybe even my Aunt Claire will learn that sometimes, love means letting go a little. So where does that leave me? Honestly, still a little unsure but standing firm in my convictions. AITA? I guess it's all part of this messy parenting journey. As I sat in my tiny kitchen, steam swirling up from the coffee mug cradled between my palms. I couldn't shake the mix of apprehension and anticipation that clung to me after Claire's message. It felt like pulling on an old sweater that I used to adore but had somehow forgotten the fit of. I replayed our last encounter over and over in my head. My mind flickered back to the confrontation at my son's birthday party, the glares exchanged over the toppings for the cake. "It's gluten-free, Aunt Claire, because Danny has a sensitivity," I had said, trying to keep my voice steady as she argued that I was being overprotective. Every word of my conviction had been met with a wave of indignation from her, a woman who had once been my confidant, my ally in navigating the familial chaos. I couldn't help but feel the weight of disappointment settle on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Yes, Aunt Claire had always been a source of wisdom, her stories rich with familial lore, but somewhere along the way, respect for my parenting decisions had dissolved into a pile of unsolicited advice and judgment. So here I was, contemplating a meetup that could potentially heal old wounds while still feeling the prick of betrayal. When I agreed to try, it felt like I was tiptoeing back to a place I used to know, a place that felt welcoming yet dangerous. Would this conversation lead to understanding or reignite old arguments? Would it be a stepping stone towards rebuilding or just another attempt to bulldoze my boundaries? My phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a reminder pinging me about the donut date. This wasn't just coffee with a friend, it involved family dynamics that felt more complicated than navigating a labyrinth blindfolded. The clatter of my son's toys in the background momentarily distracted me, grounding me in my role as a mother, the constant evaluator of who gets to influence my child's life. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that parenting is as much about creating a safe space for my son as it is about ensuring he understands the nuances of relationships. The next morning, I found myself outside our favorite bakery, the scent of warm pastries flooding my senses. Claire was already there when I arrived, her coffee in hand, her expression a strange mix of hopeful and apologetic. "Hey," I said softly, an uncertain smile creeping on my face. She looked a bit older, perhaps weighed down by life's burdens or the realization, possibly, that she had crossed lines. We chatted about the usual, the weather, what a rainstorm had done to our childhood tree fort, but there it was, lingering beneath the surface, that tension between what I hoped we could be and the reality of our strained relationship. "I know I haven't been the best aunt," Claire said, her eyes fixed on the donut display like she was trying to find the right words hiding among the pastries. I wanted to believe her, to embrace this moment, but doubt bubbled within me. It's hard for me to see you navigate parenting. I feel like I have so much to offer, but maybe it's not what you want." Her honesty was refreshing yet disarming, and I found myself wrestling with the desire to let her back into my life, while also keeping my son out of the line of fire. "I appreciate that, Claire," I replied, my heart racing. "But it's crucial for me to set boundaries, especially for Danny's sake. I want him to grow up feeling safe and understood, not under scrutiny." As I spoke, I registered the flicker of realization in her eyes, a softened understanding. We spent the next hour unpacking the layers of our relationship, trying to navigate what love looks like when respect feels fragile. I shared my experiences as a single parent, how the choices I made were never arbitrary but deeply considered, always revolving around my child's well-being. And to my surprise, Claire listened, really listened. I caught moments where her expression shifted from defensiveness to contemplation, as if she was beginning to grasp that our love might need to take on a different shape. We hugged before parting ways, an uncertain but genuine gesture. As I drove home, a sense of cautious optimism filled me. It felt like we had planted the seeds for a new beginning, though I knew they would take time to grow. Would she fully respect my parenting choices? Only time would tell. After all, trust is like a delicate flower, it takes patience to bloom again after being trampled. That evening, as Danny clambered onto my lap for story time, I felt the warmth of possibility surrounding us. Sure, I was still a little unsure, still grappling with the anxiety that came with family dynamics, but I felt lighter. AITA? Maybe in someone's narrative, but in mine, it felt more like I was pushing through the chaos, determined to carve out our peace. I sighed contentedly, holding my son tighter, hoping both Claire and I were learning that forgiveness is often found in the spaces between boundaries and bravery. That evening, as we sat on the couch with the soft light from a nearby lamp casting a gentle glow around us, I couldn't help but marvel at how sweetly innocent Danny was. He squirmed a bit, all too eager to dive into his favorite story. "Mom, read me the one with the dragon," he chirped, his little arms flapping with excitement. I grinned, The kind of smile that muscles in your face almost forget how to make until a moment like this brings it back. I pulled him closer, the sweet smell of his freshly washed hair drifting upward, wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. It was magical how one little creature had the power to transform a tumultuous day into something warm and bright, yet deep down, I still felt that twinge of unease about Claire. It's funny how life has this way of testing your limits. After our spat, I had launched into a whirlwind of introspection, replaying every argument, every well-meaning but misguided advice she'd offered, as if retracing my steps might uncover the right answer. Understanding what I wanted from our relationship was one hurdle, but keeping Danny safe from the fallout felt like climbing a mountain in stilettos. I felt at that moment, cradling the little joy in my arms, that he was my best shot at a serene future. As we settled into the story, Danny clapped and giggled at the silly voices I used for the characters. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of fear. What if Claire, in her stubbornness, couldn't respect my boundaries again? I wanted my son to grow without the weight of adult conflicts pressing down on him. The heavy thought stuck with me like a burr under my skin. When I put him to bed later, I stood in the doorway watching him drift off, the soft rhythm of his breathing echoing back to me the peacefulness I wished for our family. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence, and I nearly jumped, pulling it from my pocket. Claire was texting again. A simple message this time, thinking about that donut date. Do you think we can get it right this time? I stared at the screen, my heart ambivalent, caught somewhere between wanting to build bridges and fearing the crumbling of foundations. I typed and deleted, before finally settling on a cautious, I hope so. But there are some things we need to discuss first. I hit send, a mixture of hopeful optimism and drumming dread billowing inside me. The next morning, I sipped my coffee, staring out the window, the soft rays illuminating the world outside. I thought about how the hardest conversations often end up being the most crucial. Finding a balance between love, boundaries, and forgiveness, it felt less like a checklist and more like a dance. A complicated one. When our donut date rolled around, I wore a smile that only half masked my nervousness. Danny sat beside me, oblivious to the underlying currents, munching on a glazed treat and occasionally dipping into my plate for the sprinkles. Claire arrived, and as she walked through the bakery door, I saw a hint of the old warmth in her eyes, but behind it lay uncertainty. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the patience that comes with healing. "Hey," I said softly, breaking the ice as we settled into a booth. "I believe in giving this a second shot. But we need some ground rules." "What are you talking about?" she responded, a hint of confusion in her voice, her brow wrinkling. I felt my heart race as I tried to articulate what I had been mulling over for weeks. "It's just, when it comes to Danny, I need you to respect my decisions as a parent." The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, shifting the mood between us. Claire's expression wavered, shifting from surprise to contemplation. "I understand. I think I've been stubborn about how I view things, and maybe it's time for a new perspective," she eventually admitted, reaching for a napkin as if to wipe away unspoken tension. As we talked, nibbling on donuts and sipping coffee, a sort of thaw took place. We laid raw feelings on the table, sharing our histories and misunderstandings, each crumb of pastry like a building block toward repairing our fractured relationship. I could see that she genuinely wanted to make amends, but the real test would be in her actions moving forward. Later, outside the bakery, Danny bounced ahead of us, trailing his fingers along the brick wall and giggling as he tried to capture every shadow cast by the trees overhead. In that moment, witnessing his innocent joy, I turned to Claire and said, "Thank you for showing up today." "Thank you for giving me the chance," she replied, her voice softer, more genuine. "I really want to be a part of his life, our lives, but I promise I will respect the boundaries you've set." As we parted ways, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension swirling through me. Maybe I had been too cautious in some ways, but I didn't think I was the villain of this story. I was just a mom trying to carve out a safe and loving space for her son while balancing the complexities of family entanglements. I hugged Danny a little tighter as we walked home, whispering to him that life is often imperfect but always worth navigating together. As he chattered away about his favorite dragon stories, I realized that even when it feels chaotic, there's beauty and growth, both in ourselves and in relationships. So, was I the asshole? Maybe to some, but in this chapter of my life, as messy as it was, I was simply doing my best to foster love and understanding. The journey was still unfolding, but I felt ready for what came next, embracing the hope that blooms even in the darkest corners. The irony of life is that some of the biggest pains we cannot fathom until they creep into our lives, and in my case, it was the lingering ache of loss that caught me off guard. I'm Jake, a 30-year-old barista with dreams painted in frothy lattes and the hum of the coffee grinder. My world neatly revolved around the rhythmic pattern of brewing that I found solace in, especially with the steady pulse of regulars walking through the door every morning. They were more than customers to me, they were friends, and among them was Sarah. Sarah had been my best friend since middle school, the one who understood the nuances of my quirky sense of humor and occasionally would join me for a late-night gelato binge when I was lost in my thoughts. However, in the world of adulthood, where responsibilities shift like sand, I began to perceive a tension that hung like fog over our friendship. While I took pride in my simple life, Sarah was ambitious, climbing the corporate ladder with an agility I both admired and envied. It was a clash of worlds. She applied for jobs in bustling cities while I remained rooted in our sleepy town. And then, she got the job, an incredible offer in New York City that felt like a tornado sweeping me off my feet, leaving behind the comfort of our routine. On her last night in town, we met up at our favorite spot, a cozy little cafe resembling a time capsule from our childhood, its walls adorned with photos and art from local artists. I remember the way her smile flickered. Behind her bright eyes loomed that unspoken worry. How would we keep our connection intact once distance intervened? I was encouraged to celebrate her success, but deep down, the thought of losing my anchor began to gnaw at me. Hours turned into laughter, and we vowed to video chat and text often, but as we each hugged goodbye, I felt an unexpected wedge forming between us, one I couldn't pin down until it was too late. In those first few weeks after she left, I convinced myself I would be fine. I threw myself into work, entrenched in the comfort of espresso machines and friendly faces, but I slowly realized no amount of caffeine could fill the void Sarah left behind. The moments we once shared were replaced by empty evenings spent scrolling through pictures of her city exploits, and I grew bitter with jealousy over her seemingly perfect new life. I watched her flourish on social media, her photos lit up by the city skyline while I stayed put in our town, feeling like a spectator in my own life. The pain was nebulous at first, an undercurrent I dismissed as normal. Only later did I recognize the sharpness, a grief for a friendship that once felt so secure. Our texts fizzled, and each unanswered message carved another notch into my chest. It was not until months later, after several failed attempts to push through the silence, that she finally reached out, her voice vibrating through the phone. Sarah sounded different, the excitement of the city contrasting with my stagnant reality. It took a devastating moment, the death of her father, which compromised her world further for her to truly realize the depth of our friendship. When she needed me most, I felt totally absent, engulfed in my own cocoon of selfishness while she grieved a loss I would never understand until the call rang in. The vulnerability in her voice shattered the walls I had unconsciously fortified. I booked a flight the very next day, my heart racing with indecision but driven by an urgent instinct to be there for her. Standing in her tiny New York apartment, the scent of cinnamon and candles replaced the coffee from home, everything felt surreal. As she opened the door, we simply fell into each other's arms, tears tracing the lines of laughter and love that had once defined us. We ate takeout on the floor while I listened to stories of her father, each word another brick in a wall we began rebuilding together. In those moments, I realized how easily we underestimate the weight of missing someone until time digests the unspoken emotions. My visit wasn't just about comfort, it was an awakening, a realization that friendships are not exempt from the complex quilt of life, and sometimes, love comes in the form of understanding when to reach out or just be present. After spending a few days by her side, I left forgiven and healing, promising to never lose that connection again. The distance faded into something manageable, something we both learned to navigate like drifting clouds. And as I reflect on it now, I recognize a bittersweet irony. The pain of separation, beneath its sharp surface, unveiled a deeper appreciation for the ties that bind. Update: I'm happy to share that Sarah and I have managed to keep our friendship vibrant, despite the miles. We take turns visiting each other, sometimes even meeting in cities halfway between our homes. What started as a painful lesson has transformed into a beautiful journey of rediscovery, showing us that true connections can weather any storm, even the storms we create ourselves. But even as I share this happiness, there's a part of me that still carries the weight of our past, a reminder that relationships can be fragile, beautiful things, often mistaken for certainty when really, they are always in motion. There are days when I catch myself scrolling through old photos of us, laughing at our silly faces, or cringing at yet another selfie taken during our random road trips, arms thrown around each other in a tight squeeze as if we were trying to compress time itself. Each image is a timestamp, encapsulating moments that were once vibrant and alive but now exist only in memory. For a while after the move, I dwelled in that space, the hollow echo of her laughter fading against the walls of my apartment, which felt too large, too silent. I remember calling her one evening, the kind of twilight that draped the sky in soft pinks and deep blues. I wanted to confide my loneliness, but instead we found ourselves recapping our days. She had started a job in a quaint bookstore, replacing her old retail gig, and I had finally finished the first draft of my novel after months of feeling like I was chasing shadows. Those conversations became a lifeline for both of us, threads pulling us through the haze of change. At the same time, I began to realize that the pain of separation was not only about missing her presence, it was about confronting the ghosts of unspoken words and things left unsaid. During one of our late-night calls, Sarah mentioned something that struck me like a rogue wave crashing into the shore. She was talking about how people underestimate the pain of being alone, mistaking it for mere solitude, a simple trait of independence. "It's different when it's chosen," she said, the fragility of her tone allowing me to sense the weight behind her words. "But when it's forced upon you, it feels like a wound that's deep but never really injures the skin." I sat in silence as her words echoed in my mind, tracing a path through my heart. I never fully grasped that distinction until now. It brought clarity to my own struggle, one that became a constant companion in my new life. I started jotting down my thoughts in a journal, letting the ink spill onto the pages whenever the silence became too loud, remembering not only the bright memories of us together but also the weight of distance between. I began to attend a small writer's retreat in a nearby town, hoping to find fresh inspiration and maybe meet some new people. To my surprise, I found others sharing similar feelings in the hum of long storytelling nights, tapestry outreach sessions where vulnerability felt like an open invitation rather than a burden. It didn't take long for me to bond with a small but diverse group, a mix of aspiring poets, established novelists, and sensitive souls who, like me, were navigating their own shifting landscapes. They weren't replacements for Sarah, rather, they became companions on this unexpected journey. One of them, Liam, an insightful guy with an old soul, often encouraged me to embrace the ache of separation as an artistic tool instead of a hindrance. He said, "When you feel that gnawing emptiness, let it fill you with understanding. It's a part of you now." Leaving the retreat, I felt renewed, equipped with fresh perspectives that were like soft breezes on my once static life. And while there were still moments that I longed for Sarah's familiar laugh or the warmth of her encouraging words, I resolved to balance my newfound friendships with the enduring connection I had with her. Weeks turned into months, and although we still shared stories from our separate corners of the world, I found I no longer mourned her absence. I began to celebrate our odd little friendship, one that had evolved beyond proximity. With time, I understood that distance does not diminish the depth of love. Instead, it can broaden its horizon, allowing us to redefine what companionship means. As I sit on my porch, my journal upon my lap as the sun begins its descent, I sense a peace unfurling deep within me, a softened acceptance of life's unpredictability. It is a fluctuating tapestry, after all, woven with threads of laughter and threads of sadness, both necessary to create something uniquely beautiful. Life is a trickster in that way, and sometimes, the very separation we dread can lead to profound realignment, nurturing the roots of connection in surprising ways. As the last rays of sunlight danced upon the horizon, I couldn't help but think back on the moments that led me to this serene state of mind. There was a time when the mere thought of being apart from those I loved sent a chill down my spine. The fear of losing connection was like a storm cloud looming over my heart. But now, looking at the pink and orange hues merging in the sky, I realized the storms were often mere prefaces to breathtaking rainbows, stretching wide and full with forgotten promises of hope. Too often, I underestimated the pain that came with distance, how it could gnaw at the edges of happiness, causing protagonists of love stories to meander into unknown terrains, struggling with solitude. I remember a chilly autumn afternoon, not long after separating from Sarah, where I found myself in the small cafe we used to frequent, surrounded by the scent of roasted coffee beans and baked goods. Alone in a corner, I watched as couples shared laughter and sipped steaming mugs, the warmth of connection starkly contrasted against my own cold solitude. I didn't realize it at the time, but witnessing those interactions was an unexpected kaleidoscope of emotions, longing, nostalgia, envy, but also a quiet sense of hope that perhaps my heart might one day open itself to new connections, even with the old threads still tightly woven in. With my journal perched before me, I began writing about my feelings, the catharsis pouring onto the pages as ink, revealing shades of grief and acceptance I didn't know existed. After a while, I took a deep breath and longed for that familiar warmth, Sarah's laughter, our shared jokes, the comfort of simply being ourselves amidst the world's chaos. It was within those pages that I promised to nurture our friendship through whatever channels life had left open. It became my silent rebellion against the easily frayed ties we often allowed to unravel. I started sending her little letters, almost anachronistic in this age of quick texts, but filled with heart and warmth. I shared pieces of my life, tidbits of new experiences, silly mishaps, and even quiet moments that whispered of nostalgia, each letter crafted like a gift wrapped in memories. Sarah responded with enthusiasm, her words spilling from the pen in vibrant colors, emboldened by the distance yet softened by our shared history. She would detail her own adventures, the days spent finding solace in new places, yet all the while capturing the essence of our shared times within her prose. Sipping chai lattes in a hip cafe in her city, she wrote about a lovely park where she would sit and watch the people go by, catching glimpses of couples and families, which often stirred her thoughts back to us. I could feel our connection rekindle through each carefully curated line, each memory fluttering like autumn leaves caught in a gentle breeze, finding their way back home. And now, as I pen my reflections on this porch under the dimming sky, I marvel at how the winds of separation cooled our relationships yet allowed the roots to grow stronger. The pain I once dreaded became a bridge, leading us toward renewed laughter and adventures that were yet to come. We rediscovered the beauty of simple moments during our visits, cooking together again, our shared silence tumbling in comfort rather than tension, hiking trails that stretched beyond the horizon, mirroring the way our friendship continued to expand. Sometimes I find myself pondering the intricacies of life, how it never stays confined to just one path, how it weaves through shadows and light seamlessly, creating a dynamic tapestry of friendship, love, and connection. I learned that letting go doesn't mean losing, it often means stepping back, observing, and appreciating the layers that can emerge when we give space for growth. As the last of the sun slips below the horizon, the stars begin to sprinkle the sky, a sigh of contentment escapes me. The journey of rediscovery continues, and there lies a promise of more laughter, more shared experiences, and the gentle reminder that love and connection can always find a way to bridge whatever distance life may introduce. And so, with my heart lightened, I close my journal, embrace the darkness that envelops my porch, and let the quiet reflection of this moment guide me softly toward sleep, cradled on wings of hope in the gentle rhythm of possibility. I still remember the moment my life shifted when I was 15. The air thick with a mix of excitement and dread as I sat on my bed, my phone cradled in my hands. It felt like just another silly decision, one that all my friends were making, a way to feel grown up and wanted at an age when I struggled to understand what that even meant. I was never popular, not in the way that seemed to matter, but I had found a little corner of attention with someone who made me feel special. Alex was charming in a way that made him seem wise beyond his years, and when he began complimenting me, I felt like I was walking on air, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in my heart. I was excited yet scared. The weight of the secret I held seemed unbearable. I had told my best friend, Mia, hoping for something resembling reassurance, but she let out a soft gasp that made my chest tighten. "You sure you want to do that?" she asked quietly, her eyes wide. I shrugged, trying to dismiss her concerns but deep down wondering if I was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Then there was the night. The restless hours stretching endlessly until I finally succumbed to the impulsive thought that had gnawed at me for days. My heart raced as I positioned my phone, the soft glow of the screen lighting up the room, casting shadows that danced along the walls. The words on my screen felt heavy with meaning. I typed, hesitated, then clicked send, each second feeling like eternity. It turned out Alex was everything I thought he was but more, too. He was charming, but that charm concealed a genuinely toxic nature. The thrill of that connection quickly morphed into a sharp realization of the vulnerability I had exposed myself to. Within days, I lost my grip on a sense of safety that is naive in a world of sharp edges. The photos I had sent, intended to be a secret shared between two kids playing at adulthood, became fodder for a cruel game I never agreed to participate in when he decided to share them with his friends. I learned about it the hard way when I heard laughter echoing in the school hallways, each cruel giggle a dagger deep in my chest. They didn't call me by my name, I was simply that girl. The humiliation ballooned, each passing day a relentless storm of anxiety and shame that followed me home, invading every thought and every interaction. I'd lock myself in the bathroom, staring at the reflection of someone who felt like a stranger, questioning how I could have made such a grave error in judgment. The betrayal cut deeper than the ridicule, a twisted urge to make everyone understand that I was just a kid, lost in the whirlpool of teenage insecurities yet so desperate for validation. As the weeks faded into months, I became a ghost in my own life, a faceless figure drifting through a crowd that once felt like home. I wish I could say that I found a way to reclaim my narrative, that I could fight back and tell Alex exactly how he had wronged me, but silence was my only armor, a shield against the resurgence of hurt. Miraculously, things began to shift. I sought the unwavering comfort from Mia. She gently held my hand through the worst of it, her support a reminder that there were still people who saw me as I was and not as a caricature of someone's cruelty. The heart-wrenching experience drew some of my former friends closer while severing ties with daylight friendships that had dulled in their sincerity. Through Mia and other steadfast souls, I found resilience, learned how to vocalize my hurt, and little by little, the bravery burrowed deep within me began to bloom outwardly. It was easy to lose sight of myself in the cacophony of whispers, but I recollected the fragments of my identity, and it became apparent, my worth was no longer tied to someone else's decisions. When I finally got the courage to confront Alex months later, there was an unexpected calmness in my heart. I walked up to him, ready to finally speak what had knotted in my throat for so long. I told him how he had diminished my world, how I had trusted him and how he betrayed that trust in the most irrevocable way. What I expected, perhaps, was a reaction, anger or dismissal or maybe even a hint of remorse. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Why did you even care? It was just a picture." Those words cut deeper than anything. It solidified for me that he was consumed by his own ego, blind to the pain he caused. In contrast, I experienced the bittersweet release of standing firm, of confronting my past, and ultimately letting go. It was there and then that I understood, through those harrowing months, I had learned for myself what real strength looked like. Looking back now, as an adult, I find myself grappling with that scarred chapter of my youth, considering it a cautionary tale rather than a source of shame. I began to share my story in platforms where others might find a reflection of healing in it. I created a small forum where young people could talk about the pressures they face, harnessing pain to build resilience and community. Updates often come flooding in from those who once bore the weight of similar burdens, each message a reminder that while the past can be a formidable beast, it also has the power to bind us together in our shared experiences. In a way, it fostered a sense of empathy that had me see each person, not as a label, but as a complex collection of tales worth telling. Through that transformation, I discovered my own redemption. Instead of regret, there sprouted a kind of understanding, a luminous thread of human connection that binds us all, making us stronger. As I continued to careen through this labyrinth of shared stories and revelations, a little flame began to flicker within me, fueled by the connections I was forming. Each confession I read mirrored pieces of my own experience, and I started to see my younger self not as an embarrassment or a foolish girl lost in a world she didn't fully understand, but as a part of the universal human journey. I wasn't alone. Countless others had danced with the specter of anxiety and regret, had fumbled their way through adolescence like it was a minefield. I realized then that mistakes were not the end of the world but, rather, the very stepping stones that shaped us into who we were meant to be. As I navigated through the myriad of responses to my post, an unexpected message caught my eye. It was from a user, Phoenix Reborn 23, who expressed a particularly profound understanding of my situation. They too had sent explicit photos at a young age, only to find themselves grappling with not just the consequences of that decision but the enduring impact it had on their self-worth and relationships. They shared how, from that experience, they had channeled their pain into advocating for digital literacy among teens, working to help others understand the permanence of their digital footprints. Inspired, I found myself contemplating the idea of utilizing my story as a catalyst for change. Maybe, just maybe, I could transform my reflection into a lesson for others, a way of opening up dialogue and fostering understanding among young people who might navigate similar paths. The longer I pondered this new perspective, the more clarity washed over me, as if I was emerging from a fog that had long shrouded my thoughts. It was a quiet yet powerful realization. I could indeed choose to own my past without letting it define me. In that spirit, I decided to draft a blog post, recounting my experiences while threading in messages of hope, caution, and resilience. I wanted to share how vulnerability doesn't have to be shameful but can be a source of strength when used wisely. As I typed away one evening, anxiety prickled at my spine, but I pressed on, my heart racing with determination. Finally, after countless revisions and heartfelt reflections, I clicked publish. The responses poured in, brimming with appreciation and encouragement. It felt like some unseen chains were dismantling with each word I shared, liberating me from the shadows that had lingered over my youth. This newfound journey became about transformation, not destruction, and with each interaction, I felt that flame within me grow stronger. Months passed, and while my past never quite faded from my mind, it transformed into a reminder that my narrative was not one of isolation but of resilience. I continued to connect with others, exchanging stories of survival and strength, and seeing how they bore their own scars with grace. As I ventured into this new chapter of my life, I discovered that sharing my truths didn't just heal me, but it helped others to heal as well. Together, we forged an unspoken pact. It was okay to be imperfect, and in our collective vulnerability lay the seeds of hope, waiting to blossom into understanding. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of lavender and gold, I received a message from Phoenix Reborn 23 again. This time, they had organized a small local meetup focused on sharing personal stories related to social media and its impact on young lives. They invited me to speak, to share not just about my past but about the redemption I had found. Nervous yet exhilarated, I accepted the invitation. Standing in front of that crowd, surrounded by eager faces, I recalled the girl I had once been, the girl who found herself lost in digital shadows. But as I opened my mouth to speak, the weight of that moment turned into wings, lifting me as I shared my story. The room listened intently, and as I recounted the painful lessons, I could see understanding spread amongst them like warm sunshine. In that instant, I didn't just see hopeful futures glimmering before them, I saw the threads of connection that had been woven through vulnerability, reminding us all that our pasts might hold burdens, but they also hold the shimmering possibility of growth and reconnection. And as I stepped down from the stage, the applause enveloped me, not just in approval but in acceptance of my journey, and I smiled, knowing that I had triumphed not only over my regrets but also over the darkness that once overshadowed my youth. As I left the stage, a strange calm washed over me, so different from the turmoil that had once lived in my heart. The bright lights and the thundering applause faded into a comfortable haze as I stepped backstage, where shadows mingled with muted colors and the expressions of fellow participants mirrored the kaleidoscope of emotions swirling within me. I was enveloped in a blend of nervous energy and newfound clarity, heralding a moment of connection that not long ago had felt impossible. A young woman with piercing blue eyes approached me. She was about my age, perhaps a year or two older, her face etched with lines of concern that spoke volumes. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your story reminded me that I'm not alone in this." I felt a rush of warmth at her words. I had managed to reach out and touch someone else's pain through my own confession. The conversations that followed were like droplets of rain nourishing parched ground. Each person shared their stories, their regrets, and together we were creating a tapestry of shared experience, passing strength from one to another like a warm embrace. There was Marcus, who had foolishly lashed out online, only to find out years later that those impulsive words had deeply scarred another. He spoke of his journey toward understanding that our digital footprints leave imprints on souls, not just on screens. Then there was Sarah, who had experienced betrayal by a close friend when she shared private messages. She bore her shame openly, wielding it as a gift-like armor that now shielded her from future heartaches while also allowing her to empathize with those who falter. With every confession, I wrote these moments in my heart, storing them away like precious trinkets that shimmered with potential healing. I finally found a moment of solitude, stepping outside into the crisp evening air that enveloped me like a soothing balm. The night sky twinkled overhead, stars spread like scattered thoughts across an expansive canvas, whispering promises of endless possibilities. I closed my eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over me, feeling both a sense of closure and the stirrings of a new beginning. Somewhere down that path, I hope to build a charity aimed at helping young people navigate their struggles with self-image and impulsive decisions, to hold workshops that foster candid, open dialogues. But first, I needed to process this experience, to allow its lessons to settle deep within my bones. I picked up my phone and started to type a post for that very community that had cradled my vulnerable heart. "Let me share an unexpected awakening," I wrote, pouring out the details of the evening. I felt the gentle flow of motivation guiding me, the urge to reach out and uplift others crowding every corner of my mind. Days turned into weeks, and my original post, a simple confession of regret, had blossomed into something greater. The supportive comments poured in, each one carefully weaving a new strand into our collective story. People began to share their own moments of vulnerability, conversations sparked around family, friendships, and our digital existences. I responded to each, imparting little nuggets of wisdom, interlacing my experiences with theirs, and the ripple effects were profound. Months later, when I finally launched my nonprofit organization, I stood on the stage once more. The auditorium was filled with young faces, worried yet eager. It was during that opening speech that I realized my journey had transformed. I was no longer merely a storyteller sharing cobwebbed regret. Instead, I was a fellow traveler guiding others toward understanding, the notion that while darkness can often cloud our paths, it is also the very essence of our shared humanity that lights our way. With shared laughter and the audible exhalation of those who had felt the weight of judgment, that day became a celebration of resilience, for every timid youth sitting in the audience represented a life ready to reclaim their narrative, just like I had done. And as I concluded my speech, I felt the tether that united us all, a bond kindled by simple, honest confessions, softening the sharp edges of our histories while propelling us toward luminous futures brimming with possibility and hope. It was a crisp autumn evening when I found myself seated on a park bench, the sun dipping low and casting golden hues over the trees, lost in thought as I waited for my friend Sarah. We had grown up together, our lives entwined in a winding road of shared memories, laughter, and even occasional disagreements. One of those disagreements surfaced less than a week ago when Sarah casually mentioned she had rehomed her cat, Luna, because she was moving into a new apartment that didn't allow pets. I remember how my stomach churned at those words, the implications weighing heavy as I fought against the instinct to defend the word or home, a term that felt cold and clinical in this context. To me, it signified a relinquishment of responsibility, a decision that felt too easy for someone who had adored their pet just weeks before. When she arrived, enthusiasm radiated from her as she spoke about her new place, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had to say something. "Did you really have to rehome her?" I asked, my voice teetering between concern and accusation. Sarah's smile faltered, her eyes flicked away, a flicker of guilt dancing on her features. "Well, I didn't have a choice," she replied defensively, her fingers tracing the fabric of her jacket. It felt like an innocent conversation spiraling into something deeper, an unspoken battle of values. As she continued detailing the space in her new apartment, excitement spilling from her like the leaves falling around us, I wrestled with the weight of my words. Was I being harsh? Was it fair to confront her at that moment, when all she wanted was to share her joy? I could see Luna's big, curious eyes, the way she would curl up in my lap when I visited Sarah, and it just felt wrong. "You could have found someone who could take care of her properly," I said, my voice steadier now, watching for Sarah's response. There was a long silence. Her expression closed off, and for the first time, I felt the distance between us. "You don't get it, do you?" she finally said, a hint of anger creeping into her tone. "I loved her, but I couldn't keep her. I had to think about my life. You know how it is when you're on your own." That was it, my heartbeat pulsed loud in my ears as I processed her admission, my mind rushing through memories of late-night snack raids indulging in comfort food, the unshakable bond that had once brought us close. I was the anchor, and she had seemed so adrift. I wanted the best for her, but at that moment, I felt like I had done the unthinkable. We were friends, yet I had challenged a decision that cut deeper than I realized. After that evening, our communications chilled. She began to post pictures of her new apartment, filled with stylish decor and vibrant colors, each post a reminder of how our lives were heading in different directions. I longed to reach out, to mend the bridge I had burned with my misplaced need to correct. A few weeks later, I decided to invite her over. For coffee. As I poured and we settled into the familiar comfort of my living room, I took a leap. "I'm sorry for how I reacted. It wasn't my place to judge your decisions. I was scared of losing our friendship," she sighed, her defenses lowering. "I didn't mean to shut you out. It just hurt to hear it from you." There was a catharsis in admitting our faults, a moment where we synchronized our emotions, realizing the importance of honesty. As we talked it through, we both learned the value of understanding versus judgment. Maybe I wasn't the asshole, but just a friend trying to navigate a complex emotional landscape. I remember leaving the conversation feeling lighter, wrapped in a new layer of connection with Sarah, imperfect yet honest. In our journey to find common ground, we had stitched together a stronger bond, one that could withstand the challenges of life, including the heartbreak of saying goodbye to a pet. And as autumn slipped into winter, I reflected on how it was all right to feel deeply, to weigh decisions heavily, even when it caused ripples in our relationships. It's not about being right or wrong. Sometimes, it's simply about learning to listen. Update: a few months later, Sarah reached out, asking if I could join her for a fundraiser at the local animal shelter. Passion gleamed in her eyes as she spoke about the importance of responsible pet ownership and the struggles of animals in need. "I think it's time I helped make a difference in some way," she said. In that moment, I knew Sarah had turned her experience into motivation, reshaping her heartache into advocacy. As we teamed up to raise awareness together, that initial tension, that moment of conflict, became a stepping stone into something greater, a testament to the resilience of friendship wrapped in understanding and growth. We started planning the fundraiser with a sense of purpose that I hadn't expected. As the days passed, I found myself leaning into this project with all the energy I had, eager to support Sarah in her newfound mission. The community pulled together in a way that was almost magical. Local businesses donated food, prizes, and even some services for the event. It was amazing to see people rally around something so meaningful. The shelter, a small yet bustling space filled with the soulful mews and barks of its inhabitants, became a second home to both Sarah and me. We spent hours making flyers, organizing online donations, and promoting the event on social media. With each post and share, I noticed Sarah's spirits rising significantly. She had transformed from a person who felt the heaviness of her previous decision into a beacon of light for others who were struggling with similar choices. The night before the fundraiser, we sat on the floor of my living room, strewn with papers, colorful decorations, and half-empty takeout containers. The air was alive with excitement, and I couldn't shake the feeling of how much this experience had brought us closer. As we laughed and shared stories about the cats we both cherished and the oddities we had come across at the shelter, I felt a sense of peace settle over us. The weight of that initial argument slowly faded, replaced by shared laughter and dreams of making a real difference. We had both learned from the experience. I was grateful for the way she had opened up about her choices, and she was hopeful about helping others avoid similar pitfalls. The day of the fundraiser dawned bright and sunny, a perfect backdrop for our event. People arrived with smiles, families brought their children, and a few furry friends bounced alongside them. I could see Sarah in her element as she mingled with the crowd, reading to the kids gathered around her, while I handled the donations and set up a photo booth for some adorable pet portraits. We had even arranged for a local animal trainer to give demonstrations. The allure of seeing cute animals working alongside humans drew in a larger crowd than we could have anticipated. I kept glancing at Sarah throughout, marveling at how far she'd come since that difficult conversation. Around mid-afternoon, as we watched people bidding on hours with the dog trainer, I noticed Sarah standing by herself a short distance away, a frown creasing her brow. I approached cautiously. "Hey, you good?" I asked, concerned. I had just seen her shine moments before. She looked up at me, her eyes a mixture of uncertainty and frustration. "I guess I never really thought about how much my choice affected others," she admitted quietly. "I mean, look at all these people. They're here to support a cause." Meanwhile, I felt like I'd let my cat down. Her voice trembled slightly, and I felt a surge of compassion wash over me. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, and I understood that her past choices still haunted her despite her efforts to turn things around. The crowd buzzed in the background, but the world felt still between us. "Sarah," I said softly, "what you did wasn't ideal, but it was part of your journey, and now you're using that to make a difference." I took a moment to gather my thoughts before continuing. "Every person here has made mistakes in one way or another. Your honesty about what happened with your cat has inspired others to take responsibility. You're helping people understand that rehoming doesn't equal giving up. It can be a tough decision with a new beginning waiting on the other side." Her expression shifted slightly as she absorbed my words. "You really think so?" she asked, a hint of hope flickering in her eyes. I nodded, reassuring her with a smile. "I really do. And look around us. You're creating a community of awareness and compassion. That's bigger than just one bad decision." It was as if a dam inside her had broken, releasing the tension she'd held onto for so long, and she smiled, a genuine spark lighting up her features. As the day unfolded, I watched Sarah as she engaged with attendees, sharing stories, and embracing newfound friendships with those passionate about animal welfare. It filled me with warmth to witness her come alive in this atmosphere, where her past hadn't defined her, and her desire to advocate for animals took precedence. We did well that day beyond our expectations. We raised more funds than we could have hoped for and brought awareness to animal welfare like never before. As the sun began to set, and people started to gather their things, Sarah and I took a moment to reflect. "We really did it," she sighed, exhaustion lining her voice, but joy danced in her eyes. I felt a wave of pride swell within me as I nodded, the remnants of our earlier disagreement wholly eclipsed by this sense of achievement and camaraderie. It would take time for Sarah to completely forgive herself, and while we both knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, I was glad she had found purpose again. In the weeks following the event, we continued to volunteer at the shelter, slowly helping build a network of support and fostering hope in our community. I began to realize that even the most painful mistakes could pave the way for healing and understanding. They might be rough avenues, but they often lead us to where we are truly meant to be. With every adoption story we shared, every happy ending we witnessed, I felt grateful to be by Sarah's side, an unexpected partner in this journey towards redemption. Eventually, one evening after a long shift at the shelter, Sarah and I found ourselves just sitting in the quiet, the hum of the night wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. "I think I'm finally at peace with what happened," she whispered, her voice calm and assured. "And it's because of you." I smiled softly, feeling that once tense chapter of our friendship close like a book meeting its last page, knowing well that every ending sparks the light of a new beginning. The lessons embedded within lay the foundation for exploring our own journeys with newfound empathy and strength. As the stars flickered overhead, I marveled at how far we had come together. Gone were the days of tense discussions and misunderstandings, replaced by an unspoken bond forged in shared experiences and common goals. The shelter had become more than just a workplace, it was our sanctuary, a place where laughter spilled over the cages of cats and dogs alike, mingling with the sweet smell of pet food and the warm glow of the overhead lights. Evenings spent sorting donations turned into brainstorming sessions for future campaigns, and I could see the spark of determination in Sarah's eyes, illuminating her path forward. "You know," I said after a gentle pause, "if we keep this up, I think we'll make quite an impact." She chuckled softly, her laugh a melody that drove away the night's chill. The chilly breeze that wafted through the open window felt lovely, a reminder of the world outside, but inside, it felt like we had created our own safe haven, dedicated to ensuring others would find solace just as we had. One day, while wolfing down pizza in the break room, we started discussing the idea of an awareness poster for the fundraiser, describing responsible pet adoption in vivid detail. She suggested we feature personal stories from people who adopted pets from the shelter. I thought it was brilliant and couldn't help but share my own experience, how I had adopted my cat, Luna, who had been found roaming the streets, frightened and alone. The pure joy on her face as she listened reminded me how storytelling could bridge gaps, fostering connection and understanding amongst us. Every new idea swirled in the air like the sweet aroma of the pepperoni pie resting between us. The potential felt palpable. It dawned on me, as laughter echoed off the walls, that these projects were transforming both Sarah and me, aiding us in our journeys of growth, hers from overcoming loss, and mine from learning to advocate fiercely for those who couldn't speak for themselves. As the day of the fundraiser approached, an air of excitement hung around us, and so did the nervous anticipation. We prepared for an influx of community members at the shelter, hoping to raise funds and awareness. With the event looming closer, however, the reality of putting ourselves out there made my stomach flutter. What if I stumbled over my words? What if no one showed up? Every worry was a small cloud in the bright sky of possibility, and Sarah seemed to sense my anxiety, offering reassuring smiles and gentle pats on the back as we honed our message. "We're just sharing our love for animals," she'd remind me, her strength palpable as she navigated her own hesitations. Her calm radiance became my anchor, and slowly, I realized that our paths intertwined not just in friendship but in the mission we shared. On the day of the fundraiser, the shelter vibrated with life and energy, various booths filled with animals looking for homes, volunteers bustling, and the intimate chatter of community filled the air. As people poured into the building, I felt a swell of pride. We had worked hard for this moment, igniting conversations about responsible pet care and the responsibilities that came with adopting. I was surprised when Sarah took her place behind the mic, addressing the crowd with vulnerability and strength. She spoke of the harsh realities within the world of animal welfare, but her voice trembled with passion and love, speaking about how significant it was to choose patience over impulse when it came to rehoming pets. It struck me then, witnessing the audience captivated by her story, that our paths were not merely parallel but actually woven together in a tapestry of understanding, compassion, and collective effort. Later that evening, as the last of the guests trickled out and the leftover pizza grew cold on the table, we took a moment to revel in our success, counting the donations and smiling at the progress we made. "I used to feel so lost, you know?" Sarah admitted, her brows furrowed slightly. "But talking about my experience, sharing it with others, it's like a weight lifted." I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that this journey had not only been about healing for her but also a restorative experience for me too. Having pushed my insecurities aside to advocate for animals had carved out a stronger version of myself, one unafraid to speak up for what mattered. Eventually, as we started to clean up, I could feel the warmth of possibilities ahead. Perhaps it was more than just a fundraiser, it had become a heartfelt rallying call for the community on behalf of those animals still waiting for their forever homes. Months later, Sarah and I would still reminisce about that day, but more importantly, we continued to press on, reaching toward other endeavors that would help better our connection to animals in need. As we expanded our projects, I often thought of that original conflict, a simple miscommunication that had evolved into something profoundly transformative. A reminder that with understanding and time, even the deepest wounds could become a wellspring of strength and new beginnings, each day unfolding a little more like a gentle unfurling of a leaf in spring. It wasn't until a chilly autumn day months later when Sarah called with a breathless excitement. "You need to come over. There's someone here who needs a friend." Curious and slightly amused, I hurried over, only to find her nursing another stray she had taken in, a timid kitten with soulful eyes peering up at me. In that moment, surrounded by warmth and laughter, I knew that although there would always be challenges ahead, Sarah and I had learned how to navigate our way through life's twists and turns, one heartfelt story at a time. And perhaps, from one rehomed cat to another, we had both discovered that every end could lead to a new beginning, forging deeper connections in the heart of it all. It was a rainy Thursday evening when I found myself scrolling through old Reddit threads, nostalgia washing over me like the soothing sound of raindrops tapping against my window. The question that caught my attention was one that stirred up a melange of memories. What cheat code for a game is burned into your brain? As I paused to reconsider my response, I felt my heart quicken, not because I had a flashy code to share, but because I was reminded of a time when something as simple as a cheat code connected me to my late father in a way nothing else could. Growing up, my dad was a typical weekend warrior, always setting up the console for wrestling games or the latest action-packed adventure. He had no shortage of enthusiasm for gaming or for teaching me all the secrets that came with it. The thrill of winding my way through levels, taking down foes, and uncovering secrets was nothing compared to the laughter we shared over every successful cheat code. Like a rite of passage, he taught me the Konami code one weekend after we had spent the entire day glued to the screen, battling pixelated foes.
Up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, start, he said with a smile, and I've never forgotten it.
Years passed, my father aging like a character who was gradually losing all of his lives, and I found myself buried in high school work and the whirlwind of teenage life, forgetting about those glorious weekends spent in front of the television. It wasn't until senior year that the reality of his terminal illness hit me like a sudden game over screen. Some days were good, others were not, and as his condition worsened, we watched his energy dissipate slowly, like a dying battery. On one particularly grim day, when sadness hung heavy in the air punctuated only by the hum of breathing machines, I knew I needed to touch base with my father, remind him of the lighter times. I sneakily set up an old console by his bedside and, in a moment of courage, I turned on the game we used to play together. The familiar theme music trickled into the sterile room, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw a glimmer in his eyes. I sat beside him and recited the Konami code as though it was a prayer. I remembered the joy in his voice when we would conquer a level together, and miraculously, with the nostalgia flooding in, I saw him smile. It was a bittersweet moment, but for a few minutes, he looked like the vibrant father I had known growing up, instead of the frail man his illness had turned him into. As I pressed the buttons on the old controller, we slowly shared stories from our past, reliving glories only we understood through the lens of our shared experiences. But as the weeks stretched on, my father's condition made this game time harder to hold on to. One night, I arrived home from school to find a voicemail from the hospital, and even before the message finished, I knew what it was. The tears fell silently as the void grew within me. In the days that followed, I spent countless nights replaying our old games alone, feeling a storm of emotions that I couldn't articulate. The laugh, the love, the brisk competition, they whirled and hummed within me like a comforting melody. Eventually, the console became too painful to look at, so I packed it away. I focused on life beyond video games, studies, friendships, and dreams, but I found myself returning to that thread. The question lingered in my mind, and I realized that maybe it was less about a cheat code for a game and more about the love that infused our time together. With the much anticipated college acceptances looming, I finally decided to face my feelings. Heart heavy, I dug out the old console one final time, and although it had gathered dust, it represented a fragment of my past.
Placing it back in the living room, I took a deep breath, and spoke aloud, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, start.
That night, I played until the sun began to rise, rediscovering pieces of myself I thought I had lost. I promised myself to cherish not just the game but the lessons surrounding it, the code forever embedding itself in my heart, a reminder of the connection I shared with my dad. Life isn't just about the games we play or the cheats we know, it's about the people who make those experiences meaningful. A few months later, the void still ached but my heart felt oddly light. I found myself on Reddit once again, only now I was more interested in sharing my story rather than simply reminiscing. I hesitated briefly, wondering if my experience was worthy of being shared. Yet, I clicked to start typing, hoping my reflection might resonate with others. After posting, I received a flood of messages, some filled with empathy, others with stories mirroring my own experiences. It was as if a community had wrapped around me, reminding me I was never alone, that the code I recited had a warmth that extended beyond mere pixels on a screen. Sometimes it takes heartache to rediscover joy, even amid the most difficult circumstances, and as those weeks turned into months, I began to heal. The familiarity of the thread would transform into lifelong connections. I realize now that while video games may hold codes, love and memory are the truest cheats, equipping us to rise above and carry on in remembrance of those we cherish. In the gentle embrace of those newfound relationships, I found solace in late-night chats that spilled into dawn, where the shared vulnerabilities of strangers morphed into the pillars of my resilience. Each message came like a cheat code, unlocking pieces of laughter and encouragement just when I thought I'd exhausted my will to get up. When my days felt colorless, I'd delve into the Discord server dedicated to our favorite game, where familiar usernames glowed in the dim light of my screen, like beacon signals in a fog. We spoke of our lives, the burdens we bore beyond the avatar skins and level ups, and I learned that each of us bore scars, those remnants of heartache that reminded us of our humanity. One evening, as I sought refuge in the warm glow of my monitor, a fellow gamer named Jenna shared a card game she'd invented to cope with loss. Its mechanics were simple. Each participant would recite a memory linked to someone they missed, and with each memory shared, they would place down a card, creating a collective tapestry of longing and love. It was a healing exercise wrapped in fun, and I craved to participate, to share my pain and witness theirs. I soon learned that her unexpected vulnerability had a ripple effect. It opened doors to conversations I'd long avoided, opportunities to honor those I'd loved, and yes, even laugh at the quirky antics of my digital counterparts. That weekend, we held our first live game session over a video call, the virtual space overflowing with laughter as nostalgia washed over us like the tide pulling at a shoreline. With every story that was shared, there were gasps and bursts of laughter, the kind that dances at the edge of each syllable, transporting us back to simpler times. I could feel my heart uncoil a little, the heaviness of my grief loosening its grip, if only temporarily. I recalled a game where the protagonist could pause time, a code I'd entered too many times, where in that temporary stillness, I could gather my breath, reflect on the path taken, and, perhaps, reinvent myself anew for the journey ahead. Sharing memories with Jenna and the others felt akin to pressing that button, to freeze a moment while pain and joy collided, reshaping the landscape of my soul. Days turned into weeks, and I grew accustomed to their digital companionship, and though I had initially feared repetition would lead to dullness, I found the opposite to be true. New thoughts would spring forth, each more vivid and surprising, as we built a shared lexicon filled with inside jokes and heartfelt notes. Yet, amidst this warmth, I still felt pangs of the past creeping in uninvited, memories that snaked around my heart and mind, reminding me I would never entirely escape the shadows cast by those I'd lost. One evening, as I sat in my room, I received a direct message from Jenna, one that sent a tremble through me. "Can I call you? I need to share something." My instinct was to say no, to retreat into my well-practiced solitude, but she was my friend, and grief has a way of forcing connections when they feel most fragile. When we were connected by the thin thread of the call, I noticed her voice trembled lightly, unveiling the rawness beneath her steady exterior. "I want to let you know that I'm thinking of doing something for my brother's anniversary in a few months. I want to do a charity walk, and I plan to walk for him." My instincts diverted to protective mode, urging me to reassure her that it was wise to memorialize loved ones, but I held my tongue. "I want to invite you to join me," she continued hesitantly. "I know how much your brother meant to you." The weight of the moment settled into my chest, a bittersweet ache of longing rooted in an understanding that we shared, that what we lost could be the same, yet tasted differently depending on our flavors of love and grief. The thought of stepping into the sunlight, the cool wind against my face, made the walls of my room feel even more constricting. With my brother's absence weighing heavily in my mind, I felt a stirring of doubt. What if I failed? What if remembrance equaled pain? But as I searched for words that could explain the tug of war inside me, I realized, I'd be honored. As the days turned to weeks leading up to the walk, I found myself caught in a bittersweet whirlwind, the kind that celebrates life while navigating the ache of loss. Each evening brought moments of introspection and shared laughter with Jenna. We grew closer, entwining our stories as we prepared to honor those we loved. The day of the walk arrived, bright and crisp, casting golden rays upon the gathering crowd. I wore a bracelet Jenna had made, a simple string of beads, colored in hues I knew would resonate with memories of my brother. Surrounded by fellow participants, strangers bonded by shared experiences of loss, I felt the power of collective remembrance, a supporting current that bolstered me through each step. We walked together, side by side, my heart fluttering with every stride taken in their company, infused with purpose, guided by love. As we neared the finish line, exhaustion weighed on my limbs, yet something extraordinary was happening inside me. I could feel laughter bubbling up, mixed with poignant reflection, the dichotomy of grief and joy intertwining as I shared stories of my brother with Jenna. With each story, I began to realize that while we may create cheat codes in games, the true cheat code for living is these connections wrought in love, forged through shared pain and triumph. We crossed the finish line together, breathless under the bright sun, and as I looked into Jenna's eyes, I felt an overwhelming gratitude flood my senses. We had turned heartbreak into a celebration, not forgetting but instead weaving them into the fabric of our lives. Reflections of the past and hopes for the future spun around us, knitting tighter the threads of memory and love. I realized then that life would move forward, like a game with new levels to explore, and I was no longer a player stricken with solo quests, but part of a larger community. Together, we would weave our memories into a legacy that was truly alive, embracing every triumph and trial that lay ahead. Months later, I would often replay those moments in my mind, feeling the warmth of joy spread through me like the golden glow of sunset. And with the echo of each keystroke and every meaningful chat in that online community, I kept the heart of my brother alive, buffering the pain of absence with a new code rooted deep in love and connection that I would carry forth, always. As I advanced through the new levels of life, I found myself eternally grateful for the unexpected friendships forged in that ripple of grief. It had a way of blurring lines between strangers, bringing together gaming enthusiasts from across the globe, each equipped with their own memories and codes burned into their hearts, just like mine. I still remember the first time I logged on after months of silence, heart racing as I entered the virtual realm. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and I hesitated, feeling the weight of nostalgia and anxiety press down on me. But then the notifications began to sprinkle in like fairy dust. Friends from the threads had sent me messages, their words wrapping around me like a warm embrace. There was Emma, always cheerful, with a quirky meme tailored just for me, Lucas, dropping in with a resource guide he had compiled on gaming strategies after our countless battles in online lobbies, urging me to rejoin the fight, and Sam, who had shared his own story of loss, letting me know that through our journeys together, we were crafting a safe space where pain could transform into understanding. I found myself drawn back into the world we had collectively built, a server like no other, pulsing with laughter and camaraderie, indefatigable against the melancholy shadows of life. As seasons shifted outside my window, the game morphed too, adding new expansions, characters, and quests that kept us engaged across time zones. It became our ritual, every Friday night transformed into a digital gathering, where we checked in and supported one another through the tangible and intangible hardships life threw our way. We built not just a squad but a family, our mishaps and successes intertwining in a story that felt increasingly layered and profound. I was reminded of the way my brother had embraced every new game with unyielding optimism, and it felt fitting to mirror that spirit through every quest we embarked on, however mundane or extraordinary. I would often take a moment to step back during these sessions, filled with laughter and shared stories, and ponder how far we had come. Through late-night raids and accidental explosions, there was an unspoken promise amongst us, a commitment to carry one another, even when we felt our strongest suit was fraying. Then, one night, as the synthesized glow of our screens illuminated our faces, Lucas broke the stillness with a proposal that made my heart lift. "How about we host an online charity tournament?" he suggested, his voice crackling through the excited chaos of the chat. The idea sparked a flurry of messages, a mixture of enthusiasm and tentative worry. Were we ready for something so public, given our collective wounds? But slowly, the thrill of the thought washed over us. It felt like a power-up we never knew we needed. Our online adventures could help others, we could funnel our shared grief into hope and connection. As I watched the chat explode with chatter and heart emojis, I couldn't help but think it encapsulated everything we had bridged together over those months. We were not simply gamers on a screen, We were bearers of stories, transformed by the codes of resilience instead of defeat. Over the upcoming weeks, we organized the tournament, rallying other gaming communities, reaching out to charities, and brainstorming ways to make the most impact with our efforts. Each member of our group took on roles that suited their strengths, and what should have felt overwhelming transformed into an epic quest, each challenge met with newfound enthusiasm. As the tournament day arrived, I sat at my desk, surrounded by snacks and game controllers, with a sense of urgency tingling in the air. My heart raced not from nerves but from something else entirely. I felt my brother's spirit there with me, every cheer, every laughter echoing within the walls of my home. It was a connection that transcended distance, a network of caring souls gathered beneath the banner of love. When the tournament drew to a close, and winners were celebrated alongside heartfelt stories of those affected by the causes we fought for, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment wash over me. Though the virtual trophies were nice, what resonated deeper was the ripple effect we had created. We had helped others, drawing from our own wounds to craft a legacy filled with hope and healing. As the final moments unfolded with cheers through the voice chat, I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, attuned to the hum of laughter, the thrum of shared memories. Maybe it was in these last echoes that I found solace, in the awareness that without my brother's love, I might never have opened my heart wide enough to connect with these resilient souls who had become my lifeline. Amongst us, we shared not just codes, but the vulnerabilities and stories that transformed our gaming into something sacred. The night wound down, but the bonds we formed lingered like the melodic strains of an unforgettable soundtrack. Though the tournament may have ended, the journey continued, a radiant loop that intertwined love and connection, reminding us that in this expansive digital landscape, we could find not only the cheat codes to games but also the healing power hidden within our hearts. In quiet moments, I would recite that same code from my brother, knowing now it unlocked the largest treasure of all, a way to live courageously and effusively in his honor. I don't want to drive with you in the car. Those were the exact words that almost escalated into a full-blown meltdown one Saturday morning as my wife, Liz, and I stood in the kitchen, me absently sipping coffee and her packing the picnic basket for our long-anticipated family outing. Just to clarify, I wasn't saying I didn't want her in my life, it was more about the roller coaster of emotions that driving together managed to bring out in both of us. You know how every couple has their things? Ours seemed to be car rides. Every trip somehow transformed into an arena for argument, highlighting all the petty grievances that usually simmered under the surface. Most days, I didn't mind driving her around, but the last few outings played out like a highlight reel of our little squabbles, her getting anxious over how I drove, me getting irritated with her constant directions. Then came that fateful trip to the farmer's market, where a simple misunderstanding led to a shouting match over directions and somehow spiraled into accusations about who cared more about the event. I remember the tension sitting heavy in the air long after we parked, the bustling sounds around us drowned out by that uncomfortable silence lingering between us. So, one morning during breakfast chatter, she casually asked if I would drive to her sister's house that weekend. My heart sank, and I felt those familiar knots tightening in my stomach. The previous outings had left me drained and worn down, and I just snapped. I wasn't proud of it, my tone might have been sharper than I'd intended, but I couldn't help it. The idea of getting into that car with her again filled me with a sense of dread. I explained my feelings, how every drive felt like a trigger for us both, and any simple disagreement quickly escalated into something bigger. Liz's face fell. I could see betrayal mixed in with confusion, and her disappointment hit me like a punch to the gut. Am I really that unbearable? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment, my frustration twisted into guilt. I loved her, how could I make her feel this way? The air felt thick with unspoken words as I tried to articulate my thoughts. I wanted her to understand why I would rather drop her off at the door and let her go in alone rather than endure another trip marred by tension. But all she saw was a husband unwilling to support his wife with something as simple as driving. It felt like we were caught in this cyclical frustration, and my heart ached contemplating our distance. The car ride that day never happened. Instead, I suggested we take separate cars so we could meet there. She reluctantly agreed, but the grumble of her irked annoyance echoed long after she stormed off to get ready. I kept thinking back to that moment, tossing and turning as I questioned whether I had crossed a line or if this was a necessary boundary for my own mental well-being. Days later, I found myself sifting through various Reddit threads, poring over stories that mirrored our dynamics. Surely, I wasn't the first one with a spouse I struggled to share space with during commutes. I even contemplated posting my own version of AITA for refusing to drive if my wife is in the car. But a part of me hesitated. Deep down, I knew Liz cared, and I didn't want to turn our argument into a public spectacle. As I sat there contemplating, it struck me how foolish it seemed to navigate our lives around this one issue. I decided to approach the subject with her again. Maybe I could suggest a little help from a counselor, a group session to learn how to communicate better in those confined spaces. I prepared for another confrontation, but surprisingly, when I brought it up, her response was a sigh of relief, admitting she also felt the struggle but didn't know how to address it without making it worse. It was a small victory, one that reminded me that love is more than just beating around the bush. It sometimes means having those awkward conversations, even when they make your stomach churn. The road ahead may be bumpy, but I have hope that with a little patience and awareness, we can learn to drive together again, both literally and metaphorically. As the weeks rolled by, that small victory began to ripple into the fabric of our everyday life. We found ourselves seated across from one another more often, each conversation occasionally uncomfortable but always honest. The tension I had imagined would linger started to dissipate into something softer, almost like a mirage that fades as you approach it. Still, every time I slipped into the driver's seat with her beside me, my mind flooded with images of our past drives, moments that felt both intimate and painfully stifling. I remembered that one time we drove to the coast, laughing at how close my car came to the edge of the cliffside. I could still hear her shriek mixed with laughter as I swerved to avoid a pothole. In that memory, I felt a bittersweet ache. Those joyous days had fallen prey to an unspoken strain that was hard to articulate. One evening, while we were watching one of those awful reality shows, where people threw drinks at one another over petty arguments, I snuck a glance at her from the corner of my eye. She looked so content, yet a hint of melancholy rested in her gaze. This time I took the plunge. "Do you think we can go on a drive soon?" I asked, somewhat hesitantly. I was greeted with a skeptical arch of her eyebrow, and my heart raced in response. I rushed to clarify, "I mean a short one. Just to the park, with windows down, no destination." She paused, chewing on her lip before nodding slowly, but I could tell there were layers beneath that simple gesture. I could sense that she was weighing her answer against the awkwardness we had been navigating. "Okay, but we have to promise to communicate this time. No silent treatment, all right?" "Deal," I said, relief washing over me. When the day came, sunny and promising, I found myself standing outside the car for what felt like an eternity. She sidled up to me, and for a flicker of a moment, anxiety gnawed at the edges of my excitement. Had we really untangled the threads? Would it snap back to the old ways once we hit the road? With a deep breath, I opened the door for her, trying to fit that old romantic script despite our recent battles. As we drove, my nerves had a friend in the cool breeze flowing through the open windows. I dared to give a sideways glance at her, and to my surprise, she was smiling, a look I hadn't seen in what felt like eons. "I think I actually missed this," she said lightly. The casualness of her voice struck me, wrapping around me like a cozy blanket. There were a few quiet moments where I could feel the air between us change, morphing into something more comfortable than before. Halfway to the park, she turned to me with earnest curiosity and asked, "What was it that made you refuse to drive with me before?" The question hung in the air like a low-hanging mist. I felt trapped, I guess. It'd start as just us driving, and then I'd feel like our conversations were running out of gas. I often felt like I had to suppress my thoughts just to keep things smooth. Like we were always dodging potholes while ignoring the road ahead. She nodded, absorbing my words. That's exactly how I felt too. I was afraid to steer us into any territory that might end up with us arguing in the car, and it made me anxious. I didn't want to face that tension when it was just supposed to be a simple drive. "Why did we let it come to that?" I asked, almost more to myself than her, but she answered, her voice softer now. "Because trying to keep things perfect put pressure on us. We let the unease grow like weeds in a garden." Suddenly, I felt a weight lift, and the path ahead didn't seem so wound up in knots. This drive was no longer steeped in fear, but in reflections of moments we both cherished, nestled in between the unspoken worries. The park was just ahead when she reached for my hand, and I turned to see her looking at me with an openness I hadn't realized I was yearning for. "Let's not keep dodging the bumps anymore," she said, squeezing my hand. "Yeah, let's just drive," I replied, and as we turned into the park, I felt a resurgence of hope fill the cabin. The journey together was far from over, but it felt worth taking. We parked under an oak tree, the sunlight dancing through the branches, flickering between our faces as we looked at each other, perhaps for the first time in a long while, not just as partners sharing the road but as companions rediscovering each other, leaning into the uncertainty with a hopeful spirit. In the weeks that followed, We traded drives for hikes, park picnics, and late-night talks in our living room. Each outing became an act of reclaiming what had been lost, weaving in and out of nurturing our bond. And occasionally, our conversations would dive deep into the past where unspoken grievances lived, and we would laugh at the absurdity of how it took a struggle to glide us back into the comfort of companionship. I think hindsight can sometimes be more liberating than we give it credit for. We may still have our moments of shaky ground ahead, but for now, I know we'd learned something invaluable, the beauty of simply sharing the ride, bumps and all. I found myself smiling more as the days stretched into weeks, the sunlight filtering through our kitchen window in the morning, illuminating the promise of a new day. It felt strange, almost surreal, how conversations that once felt like precarious tightropes transformed into bridges connecting our hearts. One Saturday morning, as we were preparing breakfast, I caught her humming softly to the tune of an old song that echoed through the house. I couldn't help but join in with a slightly off-key harmony, and we both laughed at my attempt. In that moment, it was as if a weight had lifted, and the air between us crackled with a vibrant energy I hadn't felt in a long time. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still remnants of that tension whenever we approached the car. I remember the day we decided to take a drive together to visit the farmer's market, a small outing that was supposed to be relaxing. As I turned the ignition, the engine's growl filled the air, and an unspoken apprehension crawled back into my gut. I caught a brief flicker in her eyes, a hesitant glance towards the dashboard, as if she feared that the journey we were about to take would steer us off course again. I took a deep breath, recalling all the progress we had made, and turned to her. "Ready?" I asked, hoping my voice conveyed more confidence than I felt. She nodded, but I could see the edges of her lips twitching slightly, betraying the unease beneath her composed facade. As we merged onto the road, I felt the familiar squeeze of tension in my chest. The world outside zipped by, green trees blurring into a colorful tapestry, yet it felt like we were suspended in a moment that could tip either way. Halfway through, while we waited at a red light, I started talking about the summer plans, the vacation we had dreamed about, and how excited I was to explore new places with her. Slowly, she unwound, sharing snippets of her thoughts, her laughter beginning to spill into the cabin, easing the weight of past shadows. It was like oil on troubled waters. Our rhythm returned, the easy banter making the ride feel less like a challenge and more like an adventure. Yet, it was only when we parked in the lot, surrounded by laughter and the sweet scent of fresh produce, that it hit me. These outings were not just about conquering our fears but weaving a tapestry of memories, day by day, thread by thread. I watched as she slid out of the car, her face lighting up with joy at the sight of the market stalls. I realized then that this was what it meant to truly reconnect, to embrace the small moments, to not just share the driving but also the laughter that flourished in the little things. As we wandered, hand in hand, between bright displays of fruits and flowers, I felt that perhaps the real treasure was not in trying to eradicate the past but in learning how to navigate it together, combining our strengths. Even moments of silence held a new promise. We had learned to be present with each other, to sit with the stillness without letting it navigate our emotions. Months later, I found myself reflecting. Our dynamic had transformed in ways I hadn't expected. Occasionally, we still stumbled into those old patterns, where one of us would retreat or slip into silence, but now we approached those moments with awareness. I'd suggest we take a drive to unwind, ensuring we'd set the tone early, sometimes with a silly playlist or a game to keep the atmosphere buoyant. Each journey felt like a rediscovery, a chance to create new memories that overshadow the shadows of our past. Life isn't always perfect, and maybe it's in the flaws where our story truly breathes, vibrant and imperfectly beautiful. I still don't know what the future holds. Maybe more bumps, more lessons, or perhaps a serenity we haven't yet touched. But as I navigated through this winding road of life with her by my side, I found solace in the thought that we were learning together. And that in itself was worth every hesitant mile we'd faced together. The hum of chatter filled the classroom, punctuated by the clinking of chairs and the rustle of notebooks, but I was lost in my thoughts, my fingers idly tracing the smooth surface of my desk. My name, Kieran, a beautiful name that held stories of my heritage, was a constant source of comfort for me. It was a reminder of where I came from, my family's roots in India, and the rich culture that shaped my identity. Yet, as I sat there surrounded by my classmates, I could feel the familiar weight of unease settling on my shoulders. Since starting high school in the United States, I had faced the same question from my peers over and over again: why don't you pick an American name? At first, I would laugh it off, shrugging my shoulders as if it were no big deal. But as the months went by, the well-meaning suggestions became more persistent, and I started to dread the conversations. Each request felt like a tiny chip at my identity, a subtle push toward becoming someone I wasn't. One dull September afternoon, the teacher announced a group project. The moment my classmates began to huddle together, brainstorming catchy names for their teams, I felt the tension rise in my chest. I had always been an observer, preferring to listen rather than speak up, but today, something shifted inside me. As the laughter and suggestions bounced around the room, I finally exhaled a deep breath, mustering the courage to say, "I don't want an American name." The words wobbled as they escaped my lips, but the room fell silent. I could see the surprise etched on their faces, momentary confusion mixed with pity. My friend Sarah, who had always been supportive, looked at me with wide eyes. "Why not, though? It would be so much easier for everyone." Her voice was soft, but I could hear the underlying judgment. "Because it's my name. It's who I am," I replied, my cheeks flushing. The room shifted slightly, and I could sense a mix of discomfort and curiosity splashing through the group. I could feel my heart pounding louder, the pressure of their stares weighing heavily on me, but I pressed on. I dove into the significance of my name, explaining the stories my grandmother used to tell me about my heritage, the richness that came with it. I shared how Kieran means ray of light, an embodiment of hope and inspiration in my culture. I felt a strange sense of liberation as I spoke. Perhaps I was finally asserting not just my identity but also my right to it. However, as the excitement of my declaration faded, the reactions shifted. Some classmates nodded along, and a few offered apologetic smiles, but I noticed others exchanging looks of bafflement as if they couldn't fathom why I didn't want to blend in. After class, Sarah approached me, her expression mixed with concern. "I get it, Kieran, but think about it, everyone here has names you can hardly pronounce. Why wouldn't you want something that's easier for us to remember?" Her insistence left me reeling. I had no intention of conforming to someone else's convenience. I felt an emotional surge of frustration mixed with sadness as I realized how hard it was for me to bridge this cultural gap among people I thought I could trust. As the week passed, I found myself pondering the reactions of my classmates, unsure if I had been too confrontational. A lingering doubt settled in my mind about whether I had made the right choice. The struggle became my silent companion, a shadow tugging at the corners of my thoughts. Then one evening, I received a message from Sarah, a simple apology for the way the conversation had turned that day. She expressed that she understood my perspective better now, and while she might not fully grasp my experience, she respected my choice. I felt a warmth wash over me as I read her words. Perhaps I hadn't lost my friends after all. The next day at school, I entered the cafeteria, hesitant about how my classmates would respond. To my surprise, several of them greeted me enthusiastically. "Kieran," they yelled as I walked in. A flicker of disbelief turned into a smile on my face. They had embraced my name, my identity. The earlier tension faded into a past I could learn from, setting the stage for deeper connections. So now, as I sit in this moment of beautiful uncertainty, I can't help but reflect on how vulnerability can carve pathways to empathy. It's an unexpectedly uplifting realization, knowing that my voice carries weight and that my identity is worthy of respect. I learned that standing firm in my truth not only affirmed who I was but allowed others to see me for it, too. Even though there would still be moments of doubt ahead, both about my identity and how it was perceived, I felt ready to embrace the journey. The idea of belonging is complicated, particularly in a world that often insists on conformity. Yet somehow, in carving out space for who I was, I found a flicker of light in the connection we all sought, a shared humanity draped in diverse stories. And perhaps, just maybe, my name was not just a label but a bridge connecting different experiences. Update: a few weeks later, I found out that Sarah started a project on names and their meanings for our school's Cultural Day. She reached out to me, asking if I would share my story and the significance of my name. This unexpected twist rekindled my excitement about cultural exchanges, allowing me to be an ambassador for understanding in our school. As I prepared my presentation, I felt an awe-inspiring sense of purpose swell inside me, reminding me that our names can pave the way for sharing, listening, and ultimately connecting with those around us, encouraging dialogues that burst with empathy and warmth. As the Cultural Day approached, I dove deep into the significance of my name, unraveling the threads of its history and the stories embedded within it. My name, Anais, is rooted in a tradition stretching back to my ancestors, resonating with layers of meaning that felt personal yet universal. I meticulously researched the etymology, the cultural contexts, and even the stories of other individuals who share the name, finding comfort in the fact that the name was not only mine but a connection to many who walked similar paths before me. Each night, as I reviewed my notes by the soft glow of my desk lamp, I felt the anticipation build. It wasn't just a presentation, it was a chance to turn the tide of misunderstanding and perhaps inspire others to appreciate their own names and heritages. I designed a simple PowerPoint slideshow, featuring images of my family, pictures from cultural celebrations, and quotes that celebrated the beauty of diversity. On the day of the presentation, the auditorium buzzed with excitement. Students from every corner of the world shared their stories, and for the first time, it felt like I was part of something larger. When Sarah introduced me, I noticed her warm smile, and it grounded me in the moment. As I stood before my classmates, I looked out into their faces, many of whom I'd shared fleeting glances with in the past, but never truly connected to. I began by recounting the little anecdotes I had gathered about my family history, how my parents had chosen my name as a way to honor my heritage, and how it had shaped my identity. As I spoke, I could see a ripple of curiosity wash over the audience. Some leaned forward, while others exchanged glances of intrigue. I told them about that moment in the hallway that had unsettled me to my core, about feeling like an outsider simply because of my name. As the truth poured out, I felt an unexpected wave of vulnerability mixed with empowerment. Here I was, shedding my cloak of insecurity. As my presentation progressed, I encouraged my peers to share their own stories, creating a circle of respect and curiosity. One by one, hands raised high, revealing stories of names passed down through generations, and names chosen for their meanings. It became clear that while we were all unique, we also shared the same thread of seeking acceptance and connection that intertwined through our diverse backgrounds. I felt a renewed sense of camaraderie and community blossoming in the room though, which struck a profound chord in my heart. By the time I finished, I felt light, like I had released a burden I didn't even know I carried. The applause echoed, warm and sincere, and rather than purely congratulatory, it felt like a collective acknowledgement of the stories we all carried. In the following weeks, something beautiful began to unfold. My classmates, spurred on by the reactions from the presentation, started greeting each other by their names, spelling them out, sharing their meanings, and listening to each other with an attentiveness that hadn't existed before. It was as if my presentation had ignited a small cultural revolution in our school, a ripple effect of empathy and respect for the stories behind each name. Even Sarah and I grew closer. We chatted about our backgrounds often, a friendship flourishing through our differences. She even asked me to collaborate with her on a poster for next year's Cultural Day, which I happily agreed to. Reflecting on the journey we had taken, I realized that I had found my voice amidst the noise of uncertainty. The way my classmates began to see each other with more warmth, emphasizing real connection over preconceived notions, inspired me beyond words. This experience taught me that names, while they might carry the weight of identity, also bear the potency of understanding when we dare to search for meaning in them. Months later, as I watched friendships blossom and our school become a vibrant tapestry of cultures sharing their truths, I no longer felt like I was on the fringes. I was woven firmly into the fabric of our shared stories. I sometimes wondered what would have happened had I not pushed back at those moments of discomfort, and I knew that those moments had shaped me in ways I would reflect on for years to come. As I settle into bed each night, I feel grateful for the journey and those conversations we shared, threading together a deeper understanding of what it means to be both unique and connected. Update: a few weeks later, I was surprised to receive a message from a girl from another school. She explained how my story had traveled through social media, inspiring her to share her own name and its meaning in her school project. She thanked me for encouraging her to embrace her uniqueness and engage in dialogue about her culture. My heart swelled as I read her words, realizing that this ripple effect was much larger than I had ever imagined. Maybe, just maybe, our names serve not just as labels, but as bridges to a world more understanding and accepting. All we need to do is start the conversation. As her message lingered on my phone screen, I felt a new surge of motivation, a drive that pushed me to think even bigger about how I could spread this message of cultural appreciation and self-acceptance. Inspired by the girl's heartfelt words, I decided it was time to take my presentation beyond just my school. I wanted to open the door for others to share their stories too. I reached out to Sarah, who had ignited this journey for me, and proposed that we host a small event, an evening gathering where students could come together to talk about their names, share their heritage, and explore the significance behind cultural identity. To my delight, she was immediately on board, and we began brainstorming ideas that would make the event not only inclusive but also engaging. We settled on the theme names, our stories, our voices, and decided to create a cozy atmosphere filled with warm lights, cushions scattered on the floor, photos from our homes, and traditional snacks that represented various cultures. As word spread through the school, I placed an open invitation for students from neighboring schools to join us, eager for as many voices as possible to be heard. I poured my heart into crafting my presentation, aiming to highlight how names carry the weight of ancestral history and dreams, and how, through every pronunciation, we flick the pages of a wider narrative that we invite others to read. On the evening of the event, I stood at the entrance, my heart racing as I welcomed the first few students. My nervousness melted away as I noted the diverse faces filled with curiosity and anticipation. Students mingled, exchanging stories and laughter, while I observed a sense of connection weaving through the room, a tapestry made of words and shared experiences. As the gathering began, I took my place in the middle of the room, and as I shared my story, I could see nods and smiles affirming my words. It was a moment of pure magic. Everyone in the room seemed to connect on a level deeper than surface names. We were sharing pieces of ourselves. One by one, my classmates took turns sharing their own name stories, creating an unwavering atmosphere of encouragement. Some spoke of names laden with cultural significance, while others described the journey they'd taken in reclaiming or embracing their identities. I listened, entranced, as a shy boy revealed how his name, once a source of ridicule, now symbolized his family's resilience through generations. The event transformed into something monumental, a mosaic of voices each resonating with a unique timbre, wrapping around me in familiar warmth. As the night wore on, I realized this gathering had not been just an event, it was a reminder of the power we hold in sharing who we are. When it came time to close, I shared a few words of gratitude with the group, my heart full, acknowledging that every name told a story, their stories intertwined like threads in a larger fabric. Every participant walked away wearing not just their given names but also a newfound appreciation for their histories. A few days later, as I walked the school corridors, I couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere had slightly shifted. Conversations buzzed with a sense of openness, and I caught snippets of discussions about the importance of names and their meanings. One girl even approached me, shyly sharing that she had decided to embrace her traditional name instead of opting for a nickname. I felt a sense of pride, witnessing how one evening could spark such meaningful change. It was then that I recognized my voice had the power to inspire others, just as I had been inspired. Months passed, and that one event turned into a series of cultural dialogues at our school. From name stories to sharing family recipes, every gathering became a window into another world, creating a space where students felt seen and valued. It started as a simple exchange about names, but it grew to symbolize an acceptance of the beautiful diversity within our community. Reflecting back, I understood now that it was never merely about defending my name from being changed, it was about embracing identity. Recognizing that our unique stories could carve paths toward understanding. I often think of that girl who reached out to me, knowing that the ripples of our words had the potential to flow far beyond what we could foresee. Thoughtful conversations about names led to deeper connections, and through that, a newfound sense of belonging took root, not just for me, but for many others, transforming our school's narrative into one of diverse elements woven into a vibrant fabric. As I sat at my desk one evening, contemplating the journey, I smiled at the thought. In a world often fraught with misunderstanding, all we truly needed was the courage to speak, to listen, and to share names that encapsulated our history as well as our aspirations for the future. I have this recurring dream, the kind that stays with you long after you wake up, lingering at the edges of your consciousness like a familiar fog. In it, I'm back in my small apartment, the walls adorned with mismatched memorabilia from my childhood, and the glow of the television casts soft shadows across the clutter. I'd curled up on the couch, a spirited mixture of pillows and warm blankets, with the familiar theme song of my absolute comfort show echoing in my ears. If there's anything uniting my college friends and me over the years, it's the series we could watch a million times and never tire of, That Cozy Life. It's a quirky sitcom about a group of friends maneuvering through life's ups and downs, with quirky plots that always ended in heartwarming moments and the kind of humor that felt like a hug. One evening, while taking a break from my work, I decided to indulge in a binge-watch session. I reached the episode where one of the characters, Elizabeth, confronts her insecurities when her childhood friend returns to town with a life that seems so picture-perfect. As the weight of her feelings washed over her, I felt a pang of recognition ripple through me. It was subtle yet profound, an uninvited reminder of the mounting pressure I felt about my own life choices. You see, I graduated with a degree in literature a year prior, but while my friends soared into burgeoning careers, I found myself working part-time at a local bookstore, surrounded by the musty scent of old pages while my dreams remained wedged between the spines of books I longed to write. I began to question everything, feeling much like my on-screen counterpart caught in a storm of self-doubt, waiting for that breakthrough moment. It was during this time that I reconnected with Mia, my childhood best friend who had left our sleepy town to conquer the big city. In a flurry of excited messages, we agreed to meet up, and I desperately hoped she would bring with her the kind of ambition that once inspired me. When we finally met, we sat in our favorite cafe, the smell of fresh coffee enveloping us as we reminisced about those blissful days of youth that seem so simplistic in retrospect. Yet as she spoke about her fast-paced life filled with exciting opportunities and endless networking, I could feel my own insecurities rising like a tide. Her sizable success felt intimidating, and my aspirations felt small and silly, as if I'd pitifully missed the memo on how to transform dreams into reality. The hours melted away, but my feelings of inadequacy only deepened. It was then that the memory of that cozy life flickered back into my mind, specifically its ability to weave lessons into its lighthearted fabric. I could almost hear Elizabeth's voice saying that success wasn't just a straight path but a winding road filled with bumps and detours, better shared with friends who understood your journey. Finding comfort in this thought, I invited Mia to watch an episode with me, hoping it would create a moment of connection, even in our divergent paths. Surprisingly, she agreed. We laughed until our sides hurt while watching Elizabeth's comedic misadventures and heart-forward journey. When the finale credits rolled, I shared with Mia how the show had always been my safe haven, a means to escape whenever I felt overwhelmed by the real world. In return, she opened up about her struggles with feeling lonely despite her successes, revealing that behind the glimmering facade, she often craved the depth of true connection, something our bond once provided effortlessly. It felt liberating, sharing our vulnerabilities, almost like we were both characters in an episode, two old friends who wandered off script only to find their way back together. By the dusk of that evening, the weight of the world felt lighter, the connection we re-established was profound yet simple. Little did I know that this reconciliation would serve as the catalyst for my journey toward embracing my dreams without the harsh lens of comparison. The days turned into weeks as I found solace in rewatching my beloved series whenever I felt the pressures of adult life creeping up again, allowing those comforting episodes to remind me of the importance of my own narrative. As the months rolled by, I slowly began to pen my own stories, starting with daily snippets inspired by moments observed at the bookstore, drawings from our cafe escapades, and the laughter shared in those newly forged memories. Just the other night, I received a message from Mia that made my heart flutter. She relayed how she'd been watching That Cozy Life too, and found every episode echoing her doubts and aspirations, much like mine. With a burst of excitement and courage, I told her about my new writing project and asked if she'd consider being a beta reader. With her enthusiastic response, I realized the comfort show that warmed our hearts had woven its lessons tightly into our lives, allowing us to share paths filled with uncertainty but also ignited by mutual support and understanding. Life may not be a neatly wrapped sitcom, but as we both learned, it can be just as beautiful to find warmth in familiar ties. I figured sharing my journey on a Reddit thread could lead to further connections and reflections, so I posted under Confessions, hoping to find others who felt similarly. The supportive feedback rolled in, weaving a new network of friendships across the digital expanse. The Comfort Show had not only offered me solace but introduced me to a community that mirrored the support I truly needed. In retrospect, I realized that while we may never achieve the perfection portrayed on screen, embracing our flawed but vibrant stories transforms mere comfort into genuine courage. The cozy moments tend to hold the most strength, don't they? After all, life is a series of episodes, each rich in its small imperfections and lessons, echoing through laughter and connection. What more could one ask for in the grand script of our lives? As I settled back into my usual routine, I found myself reflecting on the warmth the show had brought into my life, a warmth that seemed to resonate long after the closing credits rolled. I remember binge-watching the series late at night, the glow from the screen wrapping around me like an old, comforting blanket. But it wasn't just the storyline that captivated me, it was the profound sense of understanding I felt from the characters who faced their own struggles, triumphs, and moments of vulnerability. They became friends I never met, existing in a world where flaws were celebrated rather than hidden. Each time I started another rewatch, the familiar dialogue and laughter flowed through my apartment as if it had seeped into every corner, transforming my space into a sanctuary away from the chaos outside. I began sharing my experience with this series on an online forum, weaving together the intricate details of my own life with those of the characters. I reminisced about how the protagonist, with their struggles to find balance between work and relationships, echoed my own internal battles. When I pressed send on my post, I felt a sense of dread, waiting for either silence or criticism, but instead, my inbox flooded with sympathetic messages and stories from others who felt the same. Each interaction became a moment of connection, reminding me that we are all spinning in our own orbits yet inevitably drawn to one another, like planets in a grand cosmic dance. But it was during one late-night reply to a fellow user, their story similar to mine, their struggles palpable, that a twist emerged. They shared how this comfort show had inadvertently helped them cope with their own mental health issues, and it struck a chord in me. I thought of the nights I had sat paralyzed by anxiety, the series lightening my heavy heart, and suddenly felt compelled to give back in some small way. I began organizing virtual watch parties, inviting all those who had reached out, creating a space where we could engage over our shared love for the show. The first gathering felt electric. I could almost hear the pulse of the collective as laughter erupted with every punchline and nostalgic moment. We traveled through our favorite episodes together, voices overlapping in a joyful cacophony of commentary, and in those moments, something remarkable happened. I felt a shift. The heaviness that had lingered in my chest for months began to slip away, replaced by the buoyancy of new friendships forged in the glow of our beloved series. Each gathering deepened our connections, unraveling layers of vulnerability, humor, and warmth, and we soon found ourselves discussing everything from life dreams to fears, so intimate and real it felt surreal. But as the weeks passed and winter settled in outside my window, I noticed one of the participants, Jamie, grew quiet. Their laughter had once been infectious, but during our last meeting, it felt distant, as if a shadow had fallen over their spirit. Concerned, I reached out privately, checking in and sharing my worry. It wasn't long before Jamie replied, spilling their heart out in a series of messages. They spoke of feeling lost, adrift in a world that seemed increasingly isolating, weighed down by expectations, and how the solace they found in our gatherings had begun to feel like a highlight against the drudgeries of life. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't just the spectator of my show anymore, I was an active participant in someone else's story. I suggested we have a one-on-one call where we could talk openly, just the two of us. That night, as we spoke, a vulnerability emerged, raw and beautiful. Jamie shared their dreams of pursuing art, their struggles with rejection, and their longing for connection. I listened intently, offering encouragement and sharing my own fears of inadequacy, and as the conversation flowed, it felt like we were crafting our own narrative, one of resilience and hope. Days turned into weeks, and Jamie and I became inseparable during our virtual meetups. With each discussion, we stretched out our dreams and uncertainties like threads, weaving them into something new and vibrant. Inspired by our dynamic, we decided to host a live episode commentary on our favorite parts, creating a new series of posts for those in the community to join us. It was a success. The chatrooms lit up with excitement, the joy felt like fireworks bursting across a darkened sky. In the end, Jamie and I both realized something profound, that our comfort show, while cherished, was never truly the star of the universe. It was the friendships born from it that shone the brightest. Reflecting on this journey, I smiled, knowing that sometimes the most transformative moments come not from the escapism of a favorite episode, but from the connections we foster while embracing our imperfections with courage. Life, after all, had become its own blend of sitcom unpredictability and heartfelt emotional depth, and I was more than ready for the next season to begin. Even amid the uncertainty, I knew, as the credits rolled on this chapter of our story, there was always room for another laugh, another episode, and another friend. I could hardly wait to see what came next, ready to watch the unfolding tapestry of our lives together, the comfort show continuing to inspire us in ways we were only just beginning to understand. In the days that followed, the haze of uncertainty began to lift. I found myself immersed in the online community crafted around our beloved comfort show. Late-night discussions bubbled with animated spontaneity and earnest reflections, while the threads of personal anecdotes intertwined with favorite scenes and shared quotes, forming a tapestry of camaraderie both sweet and reassuring. It was a safe haven. During one particularly quiet evening, I curled up on my couch wearing my favorite oversized sweatshirt, the glow of my laptop illuminating my excitedly furrowed brows. I opened a thread titled Life Lessons from My Comfort Show, and the posts poured in, mirroring our myriad experiences through our shared lens. I read about someone who had lost their job but found the courage to chase their dream of starting a bakery, channeling the spirit of the quirky character we all loved who had redefined failure into a zesty journey of personal reinvention. I smiled at the words of another, who had battled anxiety by replicating the show's unpredictable bravery through small, conscious steps in their daily life. It was like witnessing a series of life scripts intertwining with our favorite sitcom moments, each anecdote brimming with vulnerability and hope. As I watched the clock slide past midnight, a sense of anticipation electrified the air, urging me to take the plunge. A post began forming in my mind, a confession of sorts, combining my personal struggles and an honest tribute to the influence the show had had on my life. With deliberate movements, I started typing. I wrote about how comforting it was to have my own version of that friend from the show who nudged me to embrace spontaneity, urging me to venture out into life rather than waiting for it to come to me. I unconsciously penned down how the catchphrases hovering in our lexicon had shifted from being mere jokes to becoming mantras I whispered to myself during panic-stricken moments. Each sentence flowed easily, my fears spilling out in delicate bursts of honesty. The screen glowed brightly as I finally typed, "In a world painted with anxiety and uncertainties, I find solace in our shared laughter, the connection through flawed characters who echo my own story. Sometimes, I dare to hope I can embody their courage, even if just a little." Once posted, I didn't expect much, anticipating the regular ebb and flow of online life. Yet, within hours, my notifications began to light up like a festival of digital camaraderie. People were sharing their own reflections, building this comforting bridge between their narratives and mine. I found sort of a strange magic in the shared vulnerabilities, the strengths and weaknesses in our piece of the comfort show's vast landscape. Every reply added a new glimmer of hope, a ripple of joy punctuated with laughter. One response, in particular, caught my eye, a message from someone named Jamie, who relayed how they had started their own podcast to discuss similar themes, referencing an episode that mirrored my confession. They wrote, "Let's collaborate. It feels like our stories could guide one another." I realized then that sometimes, behind a computer screen, extraordinary connections form from the simplest of words. As weeks turned into months, Jamie and I began our collaboration, diving deep into the themes interwoven in our lives and our comfort show. We created a small but passionate audience who resonated with our stories of awkwardness, courage, love, and friendship. The podcast blossomed, allowing both of us to explore our thoughts and feelings publicly yet intimately, as if we were peeling back the layers of vulnerability together, like two characters in our very own heartwarming episode. With each new recording session, I could feel my initial hesitations melt away, replaced by an eagerness to share my voice, to really continue unearthing our collective humanity. I often reflected on this new dynamic, how our lives, much like our comfort show, contained humor and depth, a balance that felt both comforting and exhilarating to explore. Every new guest we interviewed infused our conversations with fresh perspectives, spiraling us into meaningful discussions that bubbled with joy and authenticity. But more importantly, they served as gentle reminders of the quirks that make our stories uniquely ours. And then there came a day unlike any other, where our podcast reached a significant milestone, our 100th episode. It felt surreal, almost unreal, celebrating an anniversary where each part of our journey was woven through the echoes of laughter, inspiration, and healing. That night, as Jamie and I recorded, there was an electricity in the air, a blend of nervous energy and vibrant hope. I spoke a little deeper that time, relaying to our listeners how we began this journey amid uncertainties and doubts, drawing strength from the comfort show that had first inspired me to be braver than I felt. Sitting in that small recording room, surrounded by all the memories we had accumulated thus far, moments where we forged our friendship, advocated for one another, and crafted honest discussions that opened our hearts, I knew this was more than just a podcast. It was a living, breathing testament to the connections we forge when we step into the light of vulnerability. As I signed off that night, a comforting thought echoed in my mind: no matter what the next season holds, I have found my rhythm in this episodic journey called life, hand in hand with newfound friends echoing the lessons of our beloved characters. I drifted to sleep that night filled with a warm sense of purpose, ready for whatever came next, ready to embrace it all without fear, knowing that each chapter was merely a beautiful interplay of shared experiences and laughter, another episode in the vast melodrama of our imperfect existence. And this was simply the beginning. Confession: I am a man of highly low intelligence, and there's a very slim chance that will ever change. That might sound like a harsh self-assessment, but when I look back on my life, it feels oddly true. From early on, I always struggled in school. While others grasped concepts with relative ease, I often found myself lost in a sea of confusion. It was a source of contention at home, primarily with my father, who'd often shake his head in frustration, muttering that I was a genuine disappointment. I grew up in the shadow of my brilliant sister, who always had top grades, a perfect college resume, and a charisma that seemed to attract everyone she met. When I graduated high school with a barely passing GPA, I decided to take a different path, one where I wouldn't have to compete against her brilliance. I started working at a local hardware store, surrounded by tools and paint cans, where I felt more at home than I ever did with textbooks. My coworkers accepted me for who I was, and I quickly learned the ins and outs of everything from different types of screws to the best ways to mix paint, the kind of knowledge that didn't really require sharp intellectual aptitude, just a willingness to listen and a decent memory. One fateful evening, as I was restocking shelves alone, I met her, Maria. She was an artist, doing some kind of community project that involved painting fences around town, and she wandered into our store for paint. She had a radiant energy, and as I helped her choose the right colors, her laughter warmed my insides in a way I'd never felt before. We struck up a conversation, and in that moment, surrounded by paint and hardware, I felt a spark of connection that made me forget all about my academic shortcomings. She didn't care that I was terrible at math or that I couldn't remember the capital of Kazakhstan. We talked about art, creativity, and our mutual love for nature. After that, she kept coming back to the store, and we'd share smiles that turned into inside jokes, and eventually, into something deeper. But there was a lingering fear in my heart. As things developed, I began to doubt myself and my worthiness. Maria had been to art schools and galleries, her mind was a treasure chest of culture and ideas, while I was just a guy who knew his way around a lawnmower. One night, I found myself at her place, where we were painting together under soft lighting, and she asked me about my dreams and aspirations. I froze, the question gnashing at a vulnerability I had buried deep. Could I express my dreams when they felt so mundane? I stammered out something about hoping to one day open my own hardware store, a quaint dream, perhaps, but it felt embarrassing next to her ambitions of having a gallery show. She sensed my hesitation and, rather than scoffing or diminishing my dream as I had feared, she smiled and said, "That's an incredible dream. You know you can do it, right?" Her words, rather than uplift me, lodged a sense of dread in my gut. What if she was investing time in a lost cause? As our relationship deepened, so did my anxiety. Each time I left her, I replayed our conversations, fixating on moments where I felt inadequate. I let my imaginations run wild, picturing her telling her friends about her simple boyfriend, a man who barely scraped by. One night, during a particularly vulnerable moment, I confessed my fears to her. I told her that I felt like we lived in two different worlds, one where she was a creative genius, and me, a man struggling to keep up. I braced myself for rejection, the feared look of pity or disappointment that had marked so many of my formative years. Instead, she took my hands and said, "You are more than enough for me. It's not about where we come from or where we're going, it's about the journey we build together." And for the first time, my heart felt a semblance of peace. Months passed, and I threw myself into the things I loved, working at the store, painting with Maria, and learning to embrace my creativity alongside hers. One warm afternoon, she proposed a project for the local art fair, encouraging me to join her in creating something that exhibited both of our talents. The thought terrified me, what if my lack of intelligence shone through in our joint piece? But somehow, I found a glimmer of hope in her vision. Together, we crafted a piece that merged practical elements with artistic flair, making a whimsical garden sculpture from discarded tools. The day of the fair arrived, and standing beside her, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just in our creation but in who I was becoming. People stopped by, impressed with our work, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, intelligence could manifest in forms other than academia. I wasn't just restocking shelves and answering questions, I was creating something meaningful in a world that often dismissed me. As the sun began to set, the fair bustling around us, I took a breath, letting in the fading light that symbolized hope. Maria turned to me, her eyes sparkling, and said, "I knew you had it in you." Today, as I recount this journey, I find myself reflecting not on my seemingly low intelligence, but on my ability to learn and grow in different ways. I might never be a scholar or the wizard of numbers, but I've found a treasure in self-acceptance, an understanding that everyone's mind works differently, and that worth isn't solely defined by traditional intellect. I hope that my experience might resonate with someone else feeling inadequate or overlooked, and that they too might discover their own unique path to fulfillment. And while Maria and I continue our journey, I still think back to the nights spent under a roof of stars, learning to paint both canvases and dreams, trusting that love and creativity truly know no bounds. Update: a few weeks after the fair, we received an unexpected call. The local art gallery wanted to display our sculpture in their local artist showcase. They called it a captivating depiction of ingenuity and asked if we'd both be willing to speak about our collaboration at the event. It seems the journey never really ends, instead, it twists and turns, much like my own thoughts on who I am, a simple man, perhaps, but one who is continuously evolving. As I sat there, staring at the phone in disbelief after that unexpected call from the gallery, I couldn't shake the paradox of my life. How, in my own mind, which often felt muddled and simple, could we have created something that not only captured attention but also reflected our unfolding relationship? The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind, filled with a mixture of nervous anticipation and excitement that colored every moment. I helped Elena put the final touches on our sculpture, a woven collage of discarded materials that was both a physical manifestation of our efforts and a metaphor for our lives, imperfect, but undeniably beautiful. We spent long evenings in her studio, talking about everything and nothing, the quiet hum of the city outside our window punctuating our laughter. As the night of the gallery opening arrived, I nearly choked on my words upon addressing the audience. Standing there in a room filled with bright, brilliantly trained minds and eager art enthusiasts, I felt like an imposter draped in a second-hand suit, my own intelligence seeming to wane with each chuckle or knowing nod from the crowd. But as I spoke about our sculpture and how art had threaded its way into our romance, something shifted within me. I found my voice, steady and clear, illuminating our journey and the symbiotic nature of love and creativity. It was not an act of eloquence but of genuine feeling that transformed my simple words into something meaningful. While some murmured about our unique perspective and unorthodox methodologies, I recognized that what emerged from my mouth was more than just a presentation. It was a reflection of my journey as a man who often felt at odds with a world that valued intellect over passion. Each shared glance with Elena filled me with comfort, a silent reminder that love was smudged with imperfections, and sometimes, especially for someone like me, that was more than enough. There was a camaraderie among us, forged in late-night brainstorming sessions and quiet moments of shared solitude, and as patrons congratulated us after our presentation and poured admiration towards our work, I realized that perhaps being a man of highly low intelligence wasn't solely a deficiency. It was an invitation to explore life through a different lens, one that seemed to appreciate the beauty in the flawed and the fragmented. I even glimpsed admiration in the eyes of the gallery owner as she approached us, speaking with a warmth that enveloped me, acknowledging how our art encapsulated a kind of truth that resonated with many. As I stood there, basking in the glow of unexpected success, I felt the weight of my insecurities begin to lift like fog before a sunrise. While I knew I might not ever be a philosopher or a scientist, I understood that my strength lay not in knowing the intricacies of life but in feeling them deeply. Weeks turned into months, and the gallery opening became a backdrop, a moment in time when the stars aligned just right, illuminating the possibilities that lay ahead. Through it all, Elena and I grew, coupled in this tender evolution, and I found myself modifying my own internal narrative about intelligence. It was symbolic, a feeling of progression rather than a measurable standard. The world outside continued spinning, with its judgments and expectations, but within the cocoon of our connection, we painted new stories on hidden canvases in the quiet of our studio, learning that our experiences together shaped not just our art but our hearts. We even joked about starting an art collective for those of us who felt like outsiders, art for the amateurs, we called it, where creativity mattered more than critique, and anyone with a story to tell could join us, because in the end, who I was and who I became were merely threads in a beautifully chaotic tapestry unraveling before me. As I settled into bed that night, my heart full, I wondered where our newfound journey would take us next, the anticipation warming me like a gentle spring breeze carrying whispers of future possibilities. In the silence that enveloped the room, I made a wish, not for recognition or accolades, but for the strength to embrace my own uniqueness and to keep weaving dreams into reality, just as we had begun to do together. Days turned into weeks, and each morning dawned with a palpable excitement that sparkled in the air like sunlight dancing on the surface of water. As the date of the art gallery showcase approached, Amelia and I poured our hearts into preparing for the event, infusing our conversations with laughter and anticipation. I found myself spending hours in our little studio, the faint scent of paint and clay swirling around me, as our collaboration transformed not just our artwork but also our understanding of each other. We adapted our sculptural piece, adding small details inspired by late-night talks beneath the stars, tiny figures entwined in moments of joy and heartbreak, capturing fragments of stories we shared over warm cups of tea. As I molded the clay, I thought about how far I had come from the days when my thoughts felt heavy and clumsy. This project, this relationship, had made me realize that intelligence wasn't measured solely by the complexities of one's thoughts but also by the capacity for love, resilience, and the willingness to grow. When the night of the exhibit finally arrived, I donned my best shirt, a simple blue that made my eyes sparkle, while Amelia was a vision in a flowy dress that swirled around her like waves. As we entered the gallery, its walls alive with paintings and sculptures, I felt like a child walking into a world of endless possibilities. People mingled, their whispers and laughter creating a symphony that filled the expansive space. Our sculpture stood proudly at the center of the room, a blend of textures and colors showcasing our journey, a physical manifestation of uncertainty and companionship woven into every inch. I took a deep breath, the excitement mingling with a hint of nervousness, as I spotted the event curator making her way toward us. She smiled warmly, her eyes glinting with enthusiasm, and introduced herself as Camille. "The energy you both have together is inspiring," she said. "Your work embodies something deeply human." In that moment, my heart fluttered. Here was acknowledgement, not just of our art, but of the bond we nurtured along the way. As the night wore on, we spoke to visitors, sharing the story behind our sculpture, delving into the emotions, the fears, and the hopes we infused into our creation. I spoke honestly about my journey, about how I had once felt trapped in my own limitations, and how art had become my way of inviting others into my world. To my surprise, many of them didn't just see our sculpture, they resonated with my words, sharing their own struggles and triumphs in return. It felt like building a bridge between hearts, a candid exchange of dreams, fostering connections that evening. As the event began to wind down, the gallery owner announced the highlight of the night, the winner of the Local Artist Showcase Award. My stomach fluttered nervously, I hadn't even considered winning. When our names were called as the recipients, I was momentarily rooted to the spot, disbelief washing over me like a gentle tide. Amelia clasped my hand tightly, her joy infectious, and the applause that erupted around us felt like a warm embrace. When we stepped up to accept our plaque, a beautifully crafted piece of wood engraved with our names, I felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom in my chest. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts, and I spoke from my heart. This isn't just our accomplishment, it reflects the journey we dared to share. I am grateful for my partner in crime, whose love and creativity inspired every moment of this. The audience nodded, many smiling knowingly, as if they could see the truth in my words. Later that night, as we left the gallery hand in hand, the cool breeze danced around us, and the faint sounds of laughter echoed behind. Amelia turned to me, her cheeks flushed with happiness, and said, "We did this together." I admired her, feeling a rush of gratitude for her unwavering support and our shared dreams. It was a reminder of the simple truth that had guided me through this journey, that sometimes, the greatest triumphs come not from grand notions of intelligence, but from the beauty of vulnerability and connection. As we climbed into bed later that night, I whispered a silent vow to cherish this growth, to face each new day not with the weight of expectations, but with the unwavering courage to reveal my true self, the simple man striving to weave dreams into reality. The next chapter awaited, and I knew that no matter where it led, I would embrace it with an open heart, ready for whatever surprise awaited in the tapestry of life. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon, the kind where the fading light seemed to seep through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room, and I found myself curled up in my favorite chair with a steaming mug of chamomile tea cradled between my hands. My name is Lucy, and at 32, I have perfected the art of being the family mediator. My brother, Ben, is 4 years younger than me and has always been the golden child, charming, athletic, and now engaged to Tara, a woman who seemed equally perfect on the surface. Lately, however, something about Tara felt off, and on that particular afternoon, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I needed to talk to my mom about it. We settled into our usual routine, chatting about the mundane details of the week, until I finally broached the subject, tentatively mentioning how I had overheard a conversation between Ben and Tara that felt suspicious. It was more about her complications during the pregnancy than anything else, and although I initially brushed it off, the unease had lingered long after. Mom listened intently, her brow furrowing as I recounted the conversation. I wasn't trying to gossip, it was more an attempt to express my concern, to make sense of the tension building in my family. As I spoke, I could see the worry etched on my mother's face, and I almost regretted opening up. What if it upset her or made her doubt her son's judgment? The last thing I wanted was to fracture our family dynamic. But the more I spoke, the more I felt that maybe I wasn't the only one who sensed something amiss. My mom finally took a deep breath, and with an incredulous look, she shared how she too had observed odd behaviors from Tara, especially how she seldom spoke of the baby without a hint of hesitation. My heart raced, teetering on the edge of suspicion. Was it possible that my gut instinct was right? The conversation spiraled, weaving through layers of what-ifs, and soon we were digging into the details of Tara's past, which we had only pieced together from Ben's largely glowing accounts. The discussion fueled a whirlwind of emotions within me. It felt strange to judge someone who was soon to be family, but there was an undeniable tension growing like a shadow over our household. Days passed, and despite my desire to distance myself from the tumultuous thoughts, I found myself contemplating my brother's happiness and sanity. The knowledge of my chat with my mom nagged at me. Was I being the supportive sibling or merely perpetuating family drama? The more I pondered, the heavier the air felt, until one evening, Ben called me unexpectedly. He sounded off, his voice trembled slightly, and his laughter felt forced. The perfect brother had cracked. My stomach twisted, and I listened as he talked about the challenges of impending fatherhood, how Tara's recent erratic behavior was something he was trying to understand. I wanted to scream, "You've got to be careful." But instead, I urged him to lean on me if he ever needed to vent. I realized then how much I cared for him and how reluctant I was to see him hurt, but did that make me an asshole for even discussing my worries with Mom in the first place? In a moment of vulnerability, I decided to confide in Ben about the conversation with Mom. I expected outrage, a defensive posture, but to my surprise, he was quiet, contemplative. He promised to talk things over with Tara. After hanging up, nausea washed over me. Was it right to have stirred this pot, or was I simply being protective? The weight of my choices felt suffocating, and while I hoped it would lead to clarity, I feared the storm it could unleash. Weeks later, something unforeseen happened. Ben called again, but this time his voice was laced with relief. Tara had agreed to family counseling, and during their discussions, it had come out that she had been under immense pressure, family struggles and the overwhelming fears of motherhood were buried deep, and she had masked them behind a facade of happiness. It wasn't deceit, it was pain, and a fear of inadequacy that I had never considered. My heart sank as I realized how misguided my suspicions had been. I had put Tara under the spotlight without truly knowing her story, and now I was left with mixed feelings about the gossip I shared with my mom. What I thought was an innocent conversation had triggered a catalyst for something much deeper. In the end, I breathed a sigh of relief, not just for Ben but for Tara too, who was at last seeking the help she desperately needed. I turned to my mom, who had been waiting anxiously to hear the news, and laughed softly at how quickly things had spiraled out of control. I realized I wasn't an asshole, I was simply human, trying to navigate the chaos of family life. Family dynamics certainly are complicated, filled with emotions that intertwine like vines. As I sipped my tea and reflected on the journey, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me, and I could finally embrace the imperfections that came with love. Maybe it was all just part of the messiness, and I wouldn't shy away from it again. Update: a few months later, Tara invited my mom and me for coffee, and for the first time, I saw a woman who had started to find her footing once again. We talked openly, and I realized the power of vulnerability and healing. This was no longer about suspicion or gossip, it was about connection and understanding. As I sat among family, a newfound sense of openness enveloped me, and I knew we were all moving forward together, one step at a time. The shadows had lifted, revealing a path to a stronger family bond, forged through honesty and love. As the warm sunlight flooded through the cafe window, illuminating the small round table where my mother, Tara, and I sat, I couldn't help but think about how far we had all come in just a few short months. The echoes of past gossip and the weight of previous misunderstandings felt like distant memories, replaced instead by the sound of laughter and heartfelt conversation. Tara, once a figure cloaked in suspicion and tension, now radiated a sense of acceptance that I hadn't anticipated. She spoke candidly about her struggles, her voice steady, yet softening with each word, a stark contrast to the defensiveness that had once marked our exchanges. The cafe buzzed with the hum of patrons and the clinking of cups, but in that small bubble of shared vulnerability, it felt as if time had consolidated just for us. I shared my feelings about the turmoil that had erupted within our family, how the whispering fears about her integrity had clouded our judgment, and how difficult it had been to navigate my loyalty to my mother while also grappling with my concerns about Tara's motives. Yet, as we spoke, her eyes shone with a depth of understanding that made me realize she had been fighting her own battles, ones I had overlooked in my eagerness to protect my brother. It dawned on me that the gossip which had initially driven a wedge between us now served as a gateway for true connection, a means through which we could strip away our facades and share our inner truths. At that moment, surrounded by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the simple delight of a sunlit afternoon, I felt the bonds of family stretching and reshaping. We laughed gently as we reminisced about lighter memories, free from the weight of suspicion, and I could feel an invisible thread weaving us tighter together. My mom, watching this exchange with a quiet smile, seemed relieved to witness the evolution of our dynamic, as if years of tension were finally easing from her shoulders. It was a strange familiarity, one I hadn't realized I missed so deeply, where we could just be ourselves without hidden agendas or whispered worries. As our cups clinked in a toast to new beginnings, I felt a deep-seated hope rise within me. We were healing, yes, but it was more than that. We were rebuilding, a family not just forged from blood, but from shared experiences and a commitment to understanding one another in our most vulnerable states. We talked about future family gatherings and the kids we hoped to have, and for the first time, I envisioned Tara as an aunt, someone my children could look up to. It felt liberating to finally embrace the idea that the bond we were forming could stand resilient, even against the tides of uncertainty we had all faced. The cafe buzz faded into the background as I silently vowed to always prioritize honesty and openness in our conversations moving forward. Little did I know that this meeting was only the beginning of our transformation. As we stood to leave, our spirits lifted, I caught Tara's eye, a shared understanding passing between us that hinted at the shared journey ahead, a commitment to support each other, to embrace our differences, and to keep the channels of communication wide open. Life, with all its complexities, was stretching out before us like an uncharted path, and for the first time, I felt eager rather than apprehensive about the road ahead. What started as mere speculation had blossomed into a deeper narrative of family and resilience, reminding us all of the possibility that lies within trust and vulnerability. With that beautiful thought, I stepped out into the sunlit streets, my heart lighter than it had been in years, feeling as if I had not only gained a second sister-in-law but also a true friend. In the months that followed, conversations flourished, misunderstandings disintegrated, and what we had once regarded as gossip became the foundation upon which we built a family rich in understanding and love. It was in those quiet moments of sharing our lives, our fears, and our dreams that I realized this journey was worth every misstep, every whisper, and every moment I had doubted. Tara had secured her place in our family, and together we forged a connection that was resilient and transformative, one step at a time. However, as life in our family resumed its comfortably chaotic rhythm, a lingering thought occasionally flickered in the back of my mind, resembling a distant chime reminiscence of the earlier unease. I had learned so much from the experience of sharing my doubts and fears with both my mother and Tara, yet the fact that the whispers had once permeated our lives felt like a dark echo, reverberating in corners I couldn't quite reach. Sure, we had emerged from the shadows, but I sensed that the path to unshakable trust in our relationships was still a winding one filled with cobbled stones left over from prior storms. One dusky evening, as I sat curled in my favorite armchair with a mug of chamomile tea in hand, I felt a pang of anxiety pierce through the warm comfort of our newfound familial harmony. I began to wonder, what if Tara's past could come surging back into the spotlight? What if, in our quest for connection, we had overlooked the footprints of doubt that still lingered on the edges of our joy? Those thoughts found their way into our gatherings, muted but present. It was a sort of shadow that crept around the edges of our conversations. Tara remained vibrant and engaged but seemed weary at times, like a flower that flourishes under sunlight, yet sometimes craves rain, anticipating its own inner storms with cautious apprehension. My brother Daniel and Tara had begun planning their wedding, and with every small detail shared in our new group discussions, there was an undercurrent of tension, tugging uncomfortably at my thoughts. Was this a facade? Were they both displaying happiness while secretly struggling? I wanted so badly to trust in what we had cultivated. I felt I owed it to Tara, to Daniel, and to myself, to believe in this fresh start wholeheartedly. Then, one afternoon, as our conversations continued to grow easier with each coffee date and family gathering, my mother called me with an urgency that shattered my calm. "Can you come over? Tara is here, and I think she's having a rough time." The air suddenly thickened around me, tangling my senses into a web of concern and confusion. I hurried over, my heart racing in rhythm with my thoughts. "Please, let this not be a step backward," I prayed silently as I drove through familiar streets now draped with an unease I had hoped was behind us. As I entered the house, I found Tara sitting in the living room, her face obscured by trembling hands, and my mother's eyes bright with unshed tears. Without needing words, I realized that this moment would determine if we could face any wave that life threw our way. Together, we could navigate through the tempestuous waters, or we could allow it to crash over us, unraveling our cherished connection. I settled beside Tara, taking a breath that felt like it carried the weight of my deepest fears. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," I said gently, breaking the suffocating silence. In that moment, I prayed she would see my sincerity reflected in the depths of her own eyes. Slowly, Tara's shuddering breath steadied, and after the longest pause, she began to speak. Her voice trembled as she shared her insecurities, fears about the wedding, and the haunting doubts that echoed from her past. My heart ached to hear her struggles, yet I was grateful to witness her vulnerability. None of us were perfect, after all, and the beautiful tapestry of our lives was made richer by our imperfections. This unforeseen moment of honesty became a turning point. Instead of retreating into doubt, we leaned into our shared experiences, wrapping ourselves in understanding and compassion. The connection we had forged, mingled with the trials we faced, allowed us to weave our stories together tightly, creating not only a supportive circle but a sanctuary where we felt safe enough to wreck the facade of perfect happiness. From that day forward, I understood that our family was not just a collection of individuals expected to shine at all times. We were a constellation of glimmers and shimmers, quirks and quiet battles. With Tara by my side and my mother's unconditional love binding us together, we slowly unveiled each other's fears and dreams, transforming our past shadows into the light of awareness and compassion. I felt a renewed sense of hope fill my heart, reminding me that while the path may be winding, our willingness to be honest and vulnerable was the compass guiding us forward. The journey to healing is never linear, I learned. It's filled with dips and slides, with moments that may pull apart threads only to weave them closer again. Every time we face life's uncertainties together, I found solace in the realization that our love, our family bond, was worth the challenges. Moments of laughter mingled with tears became the framework of what family meant for us. As I reflected on our growth that night, an indelible thought struck me, echoing softly as I gradually drifted off to sleep. Even amidst the fragility of life, the strongest foundations are often built upon the honesty of shared experiences, nourishing the roots of love and friendship that grow resiliently with each passing moment. I remember the morning of my first job interview as if it were yesterday, a mix of excitement and dread swirling inside me like a storm waiting to break. Fresh out of college, I was desperate for my first big break, the kind of opportunity that would finally let me escape the confines of my parents' house, where the walls seemed to echo with expectations and every conversation felt more like an interrogation. I had settled into the interview office, a room perfumed with the faint scent of peppermint and polished wood, the kind of place where dreams were supposed to begin but often fizzled into disappointments. My interviewer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Henley, had a warm smile that immediately put me at ease, or at least as at ease as one could feel when the weight of one's future hung in the balance. As he flipped through my resume, he made small talk, commenting on my university experiences, and I felt a strange sense of connection. We laughed over shared memories of late-night studying and caffeine overloads. Yet, as the questions turned serious, I began to feel the undertow of tension, as if our pleasant exchange was concealing a rapidly rising tide. The questions grew increasingly rigorous, probing into my past experiences, and that's when I noticed it, the subtle red flags that flickered in the depths of his expressions. A tightness around his eyes when I mentioned my volunteer work, a barely noticeable sigh when I talked about my time in group projects. I brushed it off at first, thinking I was simply reading too much into things. After all, this was just an interview, right? But as I articulated my vision for the future and the contributions I believed I could make to his organization, I caught a flicker of disappointment cross his face, as though I had disappointed him before I even began. The day soon morphed into an unexpected display of emotional vulnerability as I detailed my volunteer experiences, explaining how they shaped my views on teamwork and leadership. Mr. Henley nodded along, but there was a waning enthusiasm in his body language, an almost imperceptible retreat that made my heart sink. Somewhere inside, I suddenly felt the urge to justify myself, to explain why my life was a patchwork of different ventures rather than the linear path he seemed to be hoping for. The interview dragged on, each question exposing the gulf between what I thought he wanted to hear and what I needed to say. I could sense the distance growing with each passing moment, and as I exited the office, I wondered if I had left a piece of myself behind, if perhaps I had seemed too disorganized in a world that revered neat, clean lines. Days passed, each waking moment overshadowed by a gnawing doubt about my future, until finally, I received the email I had both dreaded and anticipated. "Thank you for your application," it started, and my heart sank further as words like regret and fit screamed at me from the screen. I spent that evening wallowing in self-pity, questioning my approach and feeling the weight of my perceived failures, replaying the interview in my mind over and over again. But there, amidst the waves of despair, a simple realization began to surface. I had been so preoccupied with their expectations that I had lost sight of my own identity. Slowly, I started crafting my narrative in my head, embracing the idea that my journey didn't have to mirror others' journeys to be valid or worthwhile. It was a winding path, a landscape of lessons learned, which would ultimately prepare me for opportunities that truly resonated with my spirit. I began applying for more positions, shifting my focus onto companies whose values aligned with my own. The healing was gradual but vital. I delved into further volunteering, enhancing my skill set, and forming connections that felt genuine. The process felt less like a chore and more like a journey, with growth nestled in every bump along the road. Finally, after weeks of uncertainty and with a renewed sense of purpose, I received a call from another firm, a startup with a mission that spoke directly to me. I didn't just want to rush into this new opportunity. For the first time, I felt equipped to be myself, to genuinely convey my experiences and beliefs. This time, when I stepped into the interview, the air felt different, and rather than presenting a facade, it was just me and my authentic journey. The room radiated warmth, and while the questions were still probing, I was met with shared smiles and nods of understanding. As I walked out, I felt a calm triumph wash over me, knowing that I had given my story wings. It was about much more than the job, it was a sincere expression of who I was, and I realized that discovering the right fit was about more than avoiding red flags, it was about embracing the search for places where my passions could thrive. Update: it's been a couple of months since I started my new job, and I can't express how right it feels. I've learned that the most significant red flags aren't just in the interviewers but often lie in the disconnect between who we think we should be and who we truly are. I've also developed a friendship with Mr. Henley, who reached out to offer me an unexpected opportunity to collaborate on a community project. Sometimes, paths cross in unexpected ways, and I've come to appreciate the beauty of my winding journey, ready for whatever lies ahead. As I sat in my cozy living room, the soft light of the setting sun casting golden hues across the walls, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come since that pivotal day. The little project Mr. Henley proposed had started as a simple idea, a community mural to bring the neighborhood together, but it blossomed into something far more meaningful. We gathered a lively group of people, each with their unique stories and talents, and before I knew it, the vibrant colors we splashed onto the canvas didn't just represent our individual identities but wove together a tapestry that reflected the spirit of our community. Each stroke of paint was a conversation, a connection, a laugh shared over pizza and cans of soda, with old men telling stories of yesteryear as young children splattered paint with joyful abandon. Those evenings became my sanctuary, a place to recharge away from the stresses of work, and I found myself forming relationships that felt genuine and enduring. As the weeks passed, I noticed Mr. Henley becoming a great friend, offering support and guidance, but also a touch of mystery. He had an ease about him and an otherworldly way of navigating challenges that left me in awe, yet sometimes I caught glimpses of a deeper layer within him, like shadows lingering just beneath a bright surface. One Friday evening, as we took a break to admire the burgeoning mural, I mustered the courage to ask him about himself. The way he paused, looking off into the distance as if weighing his words, left me both intrigued and anxious. Eventually, he shared snippets of his life, starting with his earlier days as a graphic designer to his decision to forsake the corporate grind for passion projects. In the midst of his tale, there was a mention of overcoming personal demons, a fleeting reference that seemed to deepen the shadows in his eyes. Over time, an unspoken bond formed between us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't revealing everything. Perhaps it was my experience from the past, where I'd seen the divide between what people presented and the truths they often hid, but the subtle red flags flickered like weak lights in the back of my mind. There was a day, certain in my conviction, when I stitched together my courage and invited him to share more. He regarded me with a smirk, the kind that held 1,000 secrets, and eventually began to talk about the time he spent in a creative retreat that pieced his life together after an emotional collapse. Part of him had always felt out of place, a wanderer searching for a purpose, yearning for acceptance. But as he allowed me a glimpse into his past, I began to sense weight behind those words, a history not just of passion but of scars that still would flare up uninvited. That night, under a velvety sky spattered with stars, I felt a strange sense of kinship with Mr. Henley. We were both navigating these paths toward healing and authenticity, albeit in different ways. Yet, I couldn't ignore my instincts forever, and the next week I overheard snippets of conversation during our group sessions, words that seemed at odds with the harmonious creation we were cultivating. Some participants whispered about how Mr. Henley had a reputation for getting close to those he saw talent in, only to shift their focus elsewhere, leaving them feeling abandoned. It nagged at me, the thought that everything I cherished about the project was somehow entangled in an imbalance I couldn't yet comprehend. Feeling the pressure bubble inside me, I sought solace in my journal, pouring my thoughts onto the pages as if to unravel the knotted threads of confusion. Were these cautionary tales true? Did my intuition speak of parallel realities, one where we completed this mural together in camaraderie and another where I would find myself tangled in the remnants of trust misplaced? The emotional roller coaster of creating art intertwined with the intrigue surrounding Mr. Henley served as both my safe haven and a source of restlessness. I was in love with this newfound freedom, the ability to express who I truly was, but how could I reconcile that love with the gnawing uncertainty that lingered when I interacted with him? Then came the turning point. During one of our collaborative afternoons, as we painted amidst laughter and music, I noticed Mr. Henley hovering a little too close to one young artist, a girl bursting with potential and eager to impress. The way he offered suggestions, his gaze lingering longer than it should have, stirred something primal within me. I pushed down the tightness in my chest and concentrated on my work, focusing on the colors I was mixing, but it was hard to ignore the growing rumbles of jealousy that pulsed through me. Later that week, I decided it was time to have a straightforward conversation. I invited Mr. Henley to grab coffee after our mural session. My heart pounded as the words piled up in my throat. Sitting across from him in the cafe, the aroma of brewed coffee enveloping us, I looked down into my cup, the steam swirling and curling into the air. "Mr. Henley," I began, fighting the tremor in my voice, "I want to talk about the project and how we navigate friendships within it." I saw curiosity spark in his eyes, and as I poured out my concerns, I expected some form of acknowledgement, but instead, he leaned back, arms crossed, with that infuriating smirk gracing his lips. "You know," he said, "sometimes it's easy to form connections when we believe the narrative we tell ourselves. But how often do we step back and realize it's just a story we create? Maybe your fears are just remnants of your old job. Let go of those preconceptions and enjoy the ride." His words sliced deeper than I anticipated. As I wrestled with the truth of it, I recognized that he had a point. I was holding tightly to insecurities, a product of a fear-laden past, while he seemed to tread with intention. Yet the shadows returned, turning the warmth of camaraderie into a cold unease. The conversation hung like stale air around us until he reached across the table, his hand atop mine, grounding me. In that moment, I chose to trust my instincts and release the tension gnawing at my gut. "Let's realign our focus," I finally suggested, my pulse racing. "From now on, let's engage everyone equally. Nobody's story should be sidelined." A flicker of something danced across his eyes, perhaps surprise or contemplation, and he finally smiled, though I sensed the undercurrent of a challenge. "All right," he acquiesced, "but we'll need to be mindful not to lose the spark." And with that agreement, I felt a renewed sense of hope settle within me, the decision to clear the ambiguous shadows, forging ahead with both clarity and purpose. As the mural neared completion in the weeks that followed, I found a rhythm of joy reverberating through the community, fueled in part by the newfound understanding among us. Mr. Henley and I became partners not just in the art but also in fostering honest conversations, cultivating an environment of trust, and drawing out the best in those around us. There was magic in the unexpected twists of our journey, a reminder that while red flags can signal caution, they can also unlock profound lessons about ourselves and others. As I looked around at the vibrant mural, realizing it represented not only our individual contributions but also the resilience of teamwork and understanding, I understood fully that my path was no longer obscured by shadows. Every winding road had led me here, ready to embrace whatever came next, eager as always to evolve alongside those whom I once perceived as mere acquaintances and who had, through the power of vulnerability and connection, transformed into lifelong friends. As I stood there, taking in the vibrant hues of the mural, the laughter and chatter of my colleagues floated through the air like a gentle breeze, warm and inviting. The colors seemed to dance in harmony with the embodiment of what we'd created together, a testament to our shared struggles and triumphs, each stroke representing a story, a lesson we all carried with us. Not long ago, I had felt adrift, questioning everything about my career and the person I was becoming, and now I found solace in the knowledge that I had surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared. Mr. Henley, with his chronically optimistic disposition and a knack for bringing out the best in everyone, had become a source of inspiration for me. His dedication to the project had opened a window into my own capabilities, encouraging me to explore not just my creative side, but my leadership potential as well. Together we had coordinated workshops that brought the community in to participate, allowing families to paint alongside us, sharing their hopes and dreams in splashes of color. With every paintbrush stroke, I witnessed strangers transform into friends, forging connections that would bridge gaps created by years of indifference. I remember one particular day when a young girl, no older than 8, approached me with wide eyes filled with wonder. "Can I help with your mural?" she asked, her fingers stained with shades of green and blue. I knelt down to meet her gaze, feeling a warmth swell in my chest, and said, "Of course. What do you want to paint?" She thought for a moment and declared, "A huge butterfly. One that can carry all our dreams." I glanced over at Mr. Henley, who was intently focused on the section of the wall behind me, his kind smile betraying the pure joy he felt at witnessing this exchange. That day was a reminder of the unanticipated revelations life can bring, what it means to hope and dream, and I made a point to ensure that the little girl's butterfly was as bold and colorful as her spirit, a new red flag of promise fluttering high amid life's uncertainties. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself not just growing in my new role, but stepping into a version of myself I never thought possible. I shared dinner with colleagues after long days at work, engaging in conversations that stretched far beyond mere small talk. We debated the best pizza toppings, laughed at our rookie mistakes in the early weeks of the project, and even shared our fears about the future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an ethereal glow over the city, I found myself at a small rooftop gathering. With laughter punctuating the crisp air, I felt a growing connection, and somehow, everyone there felt like family. It struck me then, the red flags of my past had been an invitation to reevaluate, and here, I was surrounded by love and support, reaffirming that each twist and turn had sculpted a life that felt richer, more meaningful. But it wasn't just the mural or the friendships that grounded me, it was the conversations I would have with Mr. Henley about vulnerability and authenticity. He would often sit across from me, coffee mug in hand, creating space for deep discussions about our journeys. "You know," he'd say, his eyes twinkling with insights, "it's easy to focus on the flaws of others during interviews, but sometimes we forget to reflect on our own fears and insecurities that block us from seeing their true potential." I found comfort in his words, realizing that while job interviews aim to decipher a person's capabilities, they were equally a challenge for the candidate to embrace their own truth. Those reflections continued to shape my personal narrative, leading me toward resilience and understanding. I was often reminded of a quote I had once dismissed as cliché: "The only way to do great work is to love what you do." Only now did it resonate with wisdom, vibrating with the essence of community, connection, and finding joy amidst uncertainty. The mural, now a collaborative masterpiece, stood proudly as a symbol of that journey, telling of creativity birthed in friendship and the magic that emerges when we choose to let down our walls. As I indulged in that realization, I knew that the next chapter of my life was open for exploration. My mind wandered to the next community project Mr. Henley and I had been brainstorming, an arts festival that would showcase not only shared artistic expressions but also foster mentorship in the local youth. I could hardly wait. The thrill of possibility rushed through me, invigorating my spirit with hope and excitement for what lay ahead. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly aligned with my purpose, fully aware that every winding road had led me here, to this moment of connection, creativity, and clarity. Looking toward the future, I welcomed the unexpected, accepting that sometimes the most beautiful journeys unravel from the red flags we choose to face with courage and grace.